I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I had just finished a long day of work, and the evening seemed like a perfect time to unwind and catch up with a friend. My mind was still racing, trying to process everything from the day, so I decided to make a call to one of my closest friends to talk and relax for a bit. I grabbed my phone and dialed their number, waiting for it to ring, hoping it would be a pleasant distraction from the chaos in my head. The phone rang a few times before it finally picked up, and I heard the familiar sound of my friend's voice on the other end. "Hello?" they said, their voice cheerful and relaxed, just like always. I smiled, ready to begin the conversation. But then, something strange happened. Instead of my friend's voice continuing, I heard my own voice. Clear as day, it came through the speaker, as if I had spoken it myself. "Hello?" I asked in my own tone, in the same way I would greet someone when answering the phone. I froze, my hand still gripping the phone, unsure of what I was hearing. It wasn't just an echo or a mistake, it was my own voice, perfectly timed and indistinguishable from the real me. "Hello," I repeated, almost instinctively, now feeling a cold sweat beginning to form on the back of my neck. I waited for a response, but the silence that followed felt more oppressive than it should have been. There was no reply, no response from my friend at all. Just that eerie, unsettling silence with my voice hanging in the air. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unsettling sensation creeping up my spine. Surely this was some kind of mistake, a weird glitch in the phone connection, right? I checked my phone to make sure I had dialed the correct number, but everything seemed normal. I glanced at the screen, seeing my friend's name still displayed, confirming that I had indeed called the right person. Yet, something felt off. I felt as though I was no longer in control of the conversation, or even in control of my own thoughts. It was like someone or something was mimicking me, using my voice as a tool. I tried again. "Hello?" I said, a little more forcefully this time, hoping to snap out of whatever bizarre situation I was trapped in. But again, my own voice responded, the same tone, the same words, as though I were speaking to myself. This time I felt panic surge within me. My heart started to race, and my fingers trembled on the phone. I quickly hung up, unable to handle the tension any longer. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hands, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it some sort of prank? Maybe someone had gotten a hold of my phone and was messing with me. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, I realized how unlikely that explanation was. No one could mimic me that perfectly, not even my closest friend. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of the situation. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence or some kind of technical glitch, I tried to tell myself. But deep down I knew it wasn't. It felt too real. The strange, unsettling feeling of hearing my own voice on the other end of the line wasn't something I could easily dismiss. It wasn't just odd, it was unnerving in a way that made me feel completely vulnerable, like something was watching me, or worse, something was using my own identity against me. I looked at my phone again and briefly considered calling my friend back, asking if they had experienced anything strange on their end. But I didn't. I was too scared. What if they answered the phone and it happened again? What if I was just talking to myself, over and over again, trapped in this bizarre loop where reality no longer made sense? Instead, I put the phone down and stood up, pacing around my living room. The walls seemed to close in on me, the once comforting space now feeling like a cage. I ran my hands through my hair, my thoughts growing more frantic by the second. I tried to tell myself that it was just a weird glitch, just some technology issue, but no matter how many times I repeated it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something bigger was happening, something I couldn't explain. I decided to try calling my friend again, hoping that this time things would be different. Maybe it would be normal. Maybe they would answer as they usually did, and everything would go back to being okay. But as I dialed the number again, my hands shook. I didn't know why I was so scared, but every fiber of my being told me to be cautious. It was like I was stepping into the unknown, not sure if I could handle what was waiting for me on the other side of the call. When my friend picked up the phone, I braced myself. I almost expected to hear my own voice again, but this time it didn't come. It was my friend's voice, relieved and warm, just as it should have been. "Hello?" they asked, sounding surprised but kind. I let out a long breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The tension in my body loosened, and I let my guard down, finally allowing myself to speak. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal, though my voice still trembled slightly. "Sorry, I just had a weird experience. I called, and when you answered, I heard my own voice coming from the phone. It was strange." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then my friend laughed softly, as if they were trying to reassure me. "That's bizarre. Are you sure you weren't just hearing things?" They sounded like their usual self, but I couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of doubt in the back of my mind. Had I imagined it all? Had I just misheard something in my exhaustion?
If you're not afraid of ghosts, then subscribe to this channel right now, like the video, and leave a comment. But if you're scared, let us know in the comments.
Even though I knew my friend couldn't see me. No, I'm telling you, it was real. I swear it wasn't just in my head. I heard my own voice answering the phone. There was another long pause, and I could almost feel the tension from the other side of the line. "Are you okay?" my friend finally asked, their voice a little softer now, concerned. "Maybe you should take it easy tonight. It sounds like you've had a long day." I agreed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But as the conversation continued, I started to calm down, the logic of my friend's reassuring words starting to sink in. Maybe it was a mix-up, maybe just a weird glitch in the phone system, or maybe it was something I had misunderstood. Either way, the fact that they were talking to me now, and that their voice sounded normal, was a relief. By the end of the call, I felt lighter, though a part of me remained unsettled. I hung up, hoping that the strange experience was nothing more than a fluke, and that it wouldn't happen again. The rest of the evening passed without incident, and I tried to push the bizarre memory out of my mind. But deep down, I knew one thing: I would never look at my phone the same way again. Story 2. The day had started out like any other, with the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk as I made my way to the bus stop. The street was quiet, and I had just finished a long shift at work. My legs were sore, and I welcomed the brief pause before I boarded the bus. I stood there, scanning the street, half listening to the distant hum of passing cars. The quiet moment was interrupted when a woman, probably in her mid-30s, approached me. She was dressed in a light coat and had a soft, concerned expression on her face. She glanced at me with a look that was almost too familiar, as though we had met before. I didn't recognize her, but there was something about the way she stood that made me feel like I should know her. The woman's eyes lingered on me for a moment before she spoke. "Has your injury healed?" she asked, her tone gentle but firm. For a split second, I froze. My injury? What injury was she talking about? I glanced down at myself instinctively, but there was nothing. No bruises, no cuts, nothing to suggest that I had ever been hurt. My clothes were clean, and my skin was clear. Confusion swept over me, and I furrowed my brow. I had no recollection of any injury, physical or otherwise. I felt completely fine. No, I'm sorry, I stammered, still trying to make sense of what was happening. I don't have any injury. I'm not sure what you mean. The woman didn't seem surprised by my response. She just nodded, as if my answer confirmed something to her, although I didn't understand what that might be. There was an odd look in her eyes, something between pity and concern. She seemed so sure of herself, like she knew exactly what had happened, like I was the one who had forgotten. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important, something crucial. The woman lingered for a moment longer, her gaze now slightly more intense. I see, she said, but her voice was softer now, almost sad. Well, I hope it stays that way. She then gave me a slight nod and turned away, walking down the street without another word. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. What had just happened? I turned to look after her, but she had already disappeared into the crowd, as though she had never been there. The whole encounter felt so out of place, like something from a dream that didn't quite make sense. I waited for the bus in a daze, my thoughts scattered. How could someone mistake me for having an injury I never had? And why had she seemed so certain about it? I racked my brain, trying to recall any incidents from the past few days that could explain it, but I came up empty. There had been no accidents, no falls, no injuries of any kind, nothing. I had no idea who the woman was, and I couldn't think of any reason why she would say such a thing. The bus eventually arrived, and I climbed aboard, still lost in thought. I found a seat by the window and gazed out, watching the world pass by in a blur. My mind kept circling back to that woman. What did she know that I didn't? I couldn't stop wondering how she had come to the conclusion that I was in Dorith, or if there was something I had forgotten. Had I been in an accident? Was I hurt without realizing it? The questions kept piling up, each one making me feel more and more unsettled. By the time I reached my stop, I had worked myself into a state of mild panic. I knew it was irrational, but the encounter with the woman kept replaying in my mind. I could still hear her voice in my head, soft and concerned, asking about an injury that didn't exist. The more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. How could she have known something I didn't? I decided to stop by the pharmacy on my way home, just to double check. Maybe I had sustained a minor injury without realizing it. Maybe I had bruised myself in my sleep or during the course of a hectic day. I wanted to feel reassured, to put the whole thing behind me, but something told me this wasn't something that could easily be explained away. The pharmacist at the counter looked at me curiously when I asked if there were any visible injuries, but after a quick look over, he assured me there was nothing wrong. He seemed a little confused by my question, but I left feeling no closer to an answer. It was the same feeling I had when I had left the bus stop earlier, unsettled, unsure, and a little out of place in my own life. What was happening to me? That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was completely dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woman's words echoed in my mind, her voice as clear as if she were standing beside me. What injury? Why had she said that? Who was she, and why had she known something that I didn't? My mind raced through every possibility, each one more far-fetched than the last. Had I suffered some sort of trauma that I had blocked from my memory? Had I hurt myself without realizing it? The more I thought about it, the more I felt like there was something I was missing, some clue that I had overlooked. I even began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I had imagined the whole conversation. Maybe the woman was just a figment of my imagination, created by my overactive mind. I decided to check my phone for any clues. Maybe I had missed something earlier in the day, some sign of injury that I had ignored. But there was nothing in my messages, no missed calls, and no notes or reminders that could explain what had happened. Just like earlier, everything seemed perfectly normal. Yet the unease lingered, a constant presence in the back of my mind. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of something. Something big, something I didn't understand. I had no idea where it was leading, but I couldn't help but feel that it wasn't over yet. The woman at the bus stop had known something, and I wasn't sure I was ready to find out what that was. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just some random encounter. It felt deliberate, as if I had been unknowingly drawn into something larger than myself. The next morning, I tried to push the whole thing to the back of my mind. I went about my day as usual, but the sense of dread didn't leave. Every time I passed a mirror, I found myself checking for signs of injury, scratches, bruises, anything that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing, no injury, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I had imagined it all. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The woman, the injury, I didn't have it all felt like a puzzle that wasn't meant to be solved. And yet, I couldn't stop trying to piece it together. Days passed, and the encounter faded from my mind, but the nagging feeling of being watched, of knowing something was off, never quite went away. It was as if that one moment had changed something in me, something I couldn't undo. I never saw the woman again, but I knew deep down that she wasn't the only one who had been keeping an eye on me. Something had been set in motion, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face whatever it was. Story 3. I had been spending the morning at home, going through the usual routine of checking emails and sorting through tasks. Nothing out of the ordinary. When it was time for lunch, I decided to head out to a cafe for a change of scenery and to get a bit of fresh air. I hadn't been feeling too great lately, with everything feeling a bit off, and I figured a little break would help clear my head. It was a small place on a street I'd never walked down before, one of those cozy spots with mismatched chairs and soft music in the background. I didn't think much of it when I walked in, but as soon as I sat down at a table by the window, something strange caught my eye. On the table, beside a cup of coffee I hadn't ordered, was a sticky note. It was simple, square, yellow, and stuck at the corner of the table, as if someone had carelessly placed it there. My gaze immediately shifted to the handwriting on the note, a messy scrawl of words I didn't recognize. My heart skipped a beat when I saw that the writing was unmistakably mine. It was my handwriting, no doubt about it. But the strangest part was that I had never written it, not in any context, not on any note. The words on the sticky note were simple but cryptic. "They're watching you. Don't go home." A chill ran down my spine. I stared at the note for a few moments, unable to move. How could my own handwriting be here, at a cafe I had never visited before? How could I have written something like this? The message itself sent an immediate wave of unease through my entire body. Who would have left this for me? And why? It didn't make sense. I picked up the sticky note cautiously, feeling the edges between my fingers. It felt real, like something that had been there for a while, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a coincidence. But there was no way I could have written it. I didn't even remember ever being in this cafe before. I had just found it on a whim today, and now there was a note with a message I didn't understand, written in my own hand. I looked around the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. The place seemed perfectly normal, quiet, with a couple of other people sitting at tables, none of them paying much attention to me. The barista behind the counter was busy preparing a drink. and no one seemed to notice anything unusual. But the fact that I was holding the note, staring at it, and feeling an undeniable sense of dread was all I could focus on. After a few more moments of sitting frozen in place, I stuffed the note into my bag. My mind was racing, filled with questions that didn't have answers. Why would I write such a thing? Why would I be at this cafe, a place I had never stepped foot in before, with a note in my handwriting warning me not to go home? It felt like a puzzle, but no matter how much I turned the pieces in my mind, nothing seemed to fit. I finished my coffee quickly, trying to regain some semblance of calm. I couldn't sit there any longer. As I left the cafe and stepped back out into the street, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I wasn't alone in this. Someone had left the note for me, but how had they known where I would be? How had they known I'd come to this exact cafe, at this exact time? Was it just some strange coincidence, or was something much more unsettling going on? I walked home quickly, trying not to look over my shoulder, even though I felt an overwhelming sense that someone was watching me. The streets were quieter than usual, and the familiar route home seemed foreign in the haze of my growing panic. I couldn't stop thinking about the note in my bag, about the words written on it that made no sense. I reached my apartment building and stepped inside, the feeling of dread only intensifying with each step. I locked the door behind me as soon as I entered my apartment. It was a small place, cozy and familiar, but now it felt cold, like someone had just been there, even though I was alone. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the overwhelming sense of unease that had settled over me. I set the sticky note down on the table in front of me and stared at it for a long time. I felt as if I should understand it, but I couldn't make sense of it. It was my handwriting, and yet I couldn't recall writing it. I had no memory of visiting that cafe before, and I had no idea who could have left the note there for me. I spent the next hour going over everything in my head, trying to make sense of the situation. I checked my phone, hoping there was some message or notification that could explain why I was feeling this way. But there was nothing. No missed calls, no texts. Nothing that would explain why I felt like I was being watched or why I had found that note. As the evening wore on, the weight of the situation grew heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The note kept replaying in my mind. "They're watching you. Don't go home." It was a warning, but from who? And why? I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that someone was lurking nearby, waiting for me to slip up. But no one was there. No one but the silence of my apartment and the ever-growing tension in my chest. The following day, I decided to go back to the cafe, hoping to find some clue that could explain what had happened. Maybe I had been there before and just forgotten. Maybe there was something I was missing. But when I arrived, the cafe was completely different. The layout, the decorations, the people, it all seemed so familiar, yet completely out of place. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I knew something wasn't right. The barista didn't recognize me, and when I asked about the sticky note, she gave me a puzzled look, as if she had no idea what I was talking about. I left the cafe feeling more confused than ever. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. How could I have forgotten being there before? Why would I find a sticky note with a message in my handwriting at a place I didn't remember visiting? The more I thought about it, the more the world around me seemed to blur. It was like I was living in two realities, one where everything made sense, and one where nothing fit together. The feeling of being watched never left me. Each step I took, each turn I made, felt as if eyes were on me. I couldn't escape the sensation that I was being drawn into something I didn't understand, something that was out of my control. But I had to know the truth. I had to find out who had left that note for me and why. It was the only way I would be able to make sense of this strange, unsettling experience. And so, I continued searching, hoping that one day I would find the answers I was so desperately seeking. But deep down, I knew the truth wouldn't come easily. It was as if I was caught in a web, one that had been spun long before I even realized it. And now all I could do was follow the threads and hope that the answers would come to light, even if it meant uncovering things I wasn't ready to face. Story 4. I woke up to the usual morning routine. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow through the blinds as I stretched and yawned. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, still a bit groggy from the sleep I had just woken up from. As I unlocked it to check the time, I noticed a notification from my step counter app. It wasn't unusual for me to check my steps in the morning, just to see how active I had been the previous day. But this morning, the number on the screen stopped me cold. 5 miles. 5 miles. I had barely gotten up in the middle of the night, except for the usual trip to the bathroom. I hadn't walked anywhere, let alone 5 miles. I scrolled through the app, thinking it was a glitch. It had to be, right? Maybe my phone had mistakenly counted my movements while I was tossing and turning in my sleep. But the more I looked at it, the more it didn't add up. The app showed me the steps were taken between 2:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. That was around the time I remembered being awake, but I hadn't been walking, I had been in bed. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. I turned my attention to my phone's map feature. The app had also tracked my path. To my utter disbelief, it showed that I had walked from my bedroom to the kitchen, then made a full loop around the block. My mind raced. I lived in a 2-story house, and I knew that the kitchen was on the first floor, far from my bedroom upstairs. I had to have gone downstairs to get there, but I had no recollection of doing any of it. What freaked me out even more was the fact that the app had recorded my steps accurately, showing me turning at certain intersections in the neighborhood, as though I had been walking down the street. The entire route was displayed step by step on the map. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. How had I done all this in my sleep? The thought that my body could have moved without my conscious mind being aware of it sent a shiver down my spine. Was I sleepwalking? I'd heard of people doing strange things in their sleep, but 5 miles. That was a lot. And I hadn't felt any different when I woke up. No soreness or fatigue in my legs. It was as if my body had just gone on autopilot while my mind remained completely unaware. I got out of bed, pacing around the room. I checked the time again. 7:30 a.m. I had about 30 minutes before I needed to leave for work, but the more I thought about the walk, the more I started to feel paranoid. Was I still sleepwalking? Could I be walking around the house at night without knowing it? I began to second-guess every moment before bed, every little noise I had heard in the middle of the night. Maybe I had gotten up and walked without remembering it. But the app showed the path, and it was too clear, too specific. There was no denying it. I had been outside walking around my block all while I was asleep. I decided to call my friend, hoping they could help me make sense of it. They'd always been a little skeptical when it came to strange occurrences, but I needed someone to talk to. When I explained what had happened, they laughed. They told me I was probably just sleepwalking, that it wasn't a big deal, and I'd likely been sleepwalking for years without even realizing it. But something about that explanation didn't sit right with me. The fact that I had walked that far, the fact that I had gone outside, it all felt too deliberate, like someone or something was pulling the strings while I was completely unaware. I spent the entire day trying to shake off the unease. I told myself it was nothing to worry about, that it was just a weird glitch, maybe a fluke. I couldn't remember walking 5 miles, but then again, I couldn't remember a lot of things from that night. Was I going crazy? Had I somehow been living a double life without even knowing it? As the day wore on, I began to notice other strange things. My shoes, which I'd left by the door, had dirt on them. It wasn't a lot, just a light dusting of dirt, but it was enough to make me stop and wonder. Had I walked through dirt at some point during the night? I had no memory of it, but the evidence was right there. I felt like I was in some sort of twisted dream, where things didn't make sense and my reality was slowly falling apart. That evening, I locked all the doors, double-checking everything before I went to bed. I wasn't sure what had happened, but I couldn't risk it again. I had no idea if I would sleepwalk again, or worse, if my body was doing things while I was unconscious, things that I didn't want to know about. The thought kept me up for hours. The next morning, I woke up to a new notification from my step counter app. It showed a similar route, only this time I had walked 6 miles. 6 miles. And the path was different. It led through the local park, down streets I didn't recognize. I nearly dropped my phone when I saw it. My heart pounded in my chest. How was this possible? I checked the time. It was once again in the early hours of the morning, around 3 a.m. I hadn't gotten up. I had been in bed trying to force myself to sleep, but somehow I had walked another 6 miles. I had to know what was happening. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I went to my kitchen and grabbed a notebook, jotting down everything I could remember. There had to be something I was missing. As I wrote, I thought about the dirt on my shoes the previous day. Maybe I had walked without even knowing it. But then why didn't I remember? Was I sleepwalking for real, or was something else going on? I spent the next few days keeping close tabs on my steps, my phone, and my body. I didn't want to sleepwalk again, but I didn't know how to stop it. I tried everything, sleeping with my phone under my pillow, setting an alarm to wake me every hour, trying to keep my mind awake, but nothing worked. My phone kept tracking my steps, and each morning I woke to more strange routes and more miles walked. It wasn't until a week later that I found something that made me stop in my tracks. I was reviewing the step counter data one morning when I noticed something odd. The app had recorded my last walk not just as a 5-mile route, but as a route I had never taken before. The park, the streets, they were unfamiliar, but the time on the app, 3:15 a.m., matched the time I had woken up the morning before. Something wasn't adding up. It was as if I was moving through places I didn't recognize, places I had never been before, all while I was asleep. The thought hit me like a ton of bricks. What if I wasn't just sleepwalking? What if I was being led somewhere? What if my body was moving on its own, guided by something or someone else? It wasn't until a few nights later that I finally got some answers. I woke up in the middle of the night, startled by the sound of footsteps outside my window. I crept out of bed, heart racing. The room was dark, but I could hear the faint sound of someone walking in the yard. I slowly pulled the blinds back and peeked out. And there, in the moonlight, was someone standing in my yard, looking right at me. But when I looked closer, the figure was gone. Story 5. I had just arrived at the hotel, exhausted after a long drive. I had been planning this trip for weeks, looking forward to a much-needed break, and I was eager to check in. As I walked into the lobby, I was greeted by the receptionist behind the counter. She looked at me with a warm smile and said, "Welcome back." The words caught me off guard. I paused for a moment, not knowing how to respond. I had never been here before, at least not that I could remember. The receptionist continued to smile, as though she had known me for years. I tried to brush off the feeling of unease, chalking it up to her being friendly and welcoming, but something about her tone felt too familiar. I smiled awkwardly and told her that it was my first time staying here. Her smile faltered for just a second, but then she recovered quickly, nodding as if nothing was amiss. She asked for my ID and reservation details, which I provided without hesitation. Still, the whole interaction was unsettling. How could she possibly think I had stayed here before? It lingered in the back of my mind as I followed her instructions and headed toward the elevator. As I rode up to my room, my thoughts raced. Was it a mistake? Did I perhaps stay here years ago and my memory had simply failed me? I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something more to it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the room itself. The hotel was nice, clean, and modern, but there was something eerily quiet about it. It felt like I was walking through a set nothing real, just a place meant for me to feel a sense of déjà vu. When I finally made it to my room, I dropped my bags and sat down on the bed, still thinking about the receptionist's words. I tried to rationalize the situation. It wasn't uncommon for people to mistake others for someone they had met before, right? Maybe she had confused me with someone else, or maybe the hotel had been a part of a chain I had stayed at in the past. But none of those explanations made sense. I hadn't traveled much in the past few years, and I certainly hadn't stayed at this hotel or any of its affiliates. I decided to unpack and relax, trying to clear my mind, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It gnawed at me, the certainty that something was off. As I unpacked my suitcase, I noticed something strange. There, on the desk in the room, was a welcome card. It was a standard card with the hotel's logo on it, and it was signed by the manager. But there was something written in the corner of the card that made my blood run cold. "We hope you enjoy your stay once again." Once again. The words echoed in my mind, and I felt a sudden chill. How could they know that I had been here before? I stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the card. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. I searched my memory, trying to recall any time in the past when I might have visited this hotel. But nothing came to mind. I had never been here, never stayed in this room, yet everything seemed to suggest otherwise. Even the receptionist's greeting now felt less like a mistake and more like an intentional statement. It was as if they knew something I didn't. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I grabbed my phone and pulled up the hotel's website. Maybe there was something I had missed during the booking process, something that could explain the strange familiarity. But when I checked the website, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The hotel looked exactly as I had expected it to: modern, stylish, and well-reviewed. I even checked the reviews, and I was certain that none of the guests mentioned anything about the odd behavior of the staff. I decided to do what I usually did when I was feeling uneasy: take a walk. Maybe the fresh air would help clear my mind and shake off the unsettling feeling that had settled over me. I left the room and made my way through the hotel's hallways, trying to distract myself by looking at the artwork on the walls and the decorations in the lobby. But the further I walked, the more I began to notice something odd. The hotel seemed too quiet. There were no other guests in the halls, no sound of doors opening or closing. It felt like I was the only one there. I stopped by the elevator again, noticing that there was no one else waiting. The silence was deafening. I had to force myself to move, to keep walking, but it felt like I was moving through a dream. There was something eerily familiar about the layout of the hotel. The hallways, the furniture, even the lighting, all of it seemed like it had been designed specifically to make me feel like I had been here before. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I returned to my room, my mind buzzing with confusion and fear. I couldn't help but wonder if I was losing my grip on reality. Had I stayed here before and simply forgotten? Was it possible that I had stayed here years ago and my mind had blocked it out? I had never been the type to believe in things like memory loss or hypnosis, but now I wasn't so sure. What if there was something more sinister at play? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound in the room. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background, and the faint sound of traffic from outside reached my ears. But still, the hotel felt unnervingly quiet, as if it was hiding something from me. I got up and checked the locks on the door again, even though I had already done so earlier. The chain lock was secure, the deadbolt in place, yet I still felt uneasy. I wasn't sure why I was so on edge, but the feeling lingered. The next morning I decided to talk to the receptionist. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure what exactly I was looking for. I made my way down to the lobby, trying to appear calm despite the growing anxiety in my chest. When I reached the front desk, the receptionist looked up at me and smiled again. "Good morning," she said, her voice as cheerful as ever. "Did you sleep well?" I hesitated before responding. I have to ask you something. You said welcome back yesterday. How could you know I've been here before?" I watched her closely, waiting for her reaction. For a moment she didn't say anything. Her smile faded just a little, but she quickly recovered, her tone never wavering. "Oh, you must have stayed here before with a different name. We get a lot of regulars." Something about her response didn't sit right with me. It felt rehearsed, like she was saying the words she knew would satisfy my curiosity. But I wasn't satisfied. "I'm sure I've never stayed here before," I said firmly. "This is my first time and I'm certain of it." She looked at me, her smile returning, but this time there was something different in her eyes, something almost knowing. "Well," she said with a little laugh, "it must have just been a mistake. Enjoy your stay." I left the lobby feeling no closer to understanding what was going on. But as I walked away, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt before. Maybe there was no logical explanation. Maybe I had stayed here once, or maybe I hadn't. But either way, I was determined not to let it haunt me any longer. Whatever strange connection I had with this hotel, I would face it head on. And in doing so, I hoped I would find the answers I needed, even if they were buried in the past. Story 6. I was running late, as usual. The morning had been a whirlwind of missed alarms, spilled coffee, and the frantic search for my keys. I was trying to make it to an important meeting, and the only thing I could focus on was the clock ticking down as I sped through the streets. The car hummed along the familiar route, and I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that I was going to make it, that I just had to keep moving. But something happened that made me freeze in a way I wasn't prepared for. As I was driving down the road, I spotted my car parked on the side of the street. It wasn't just any car, it was mine, a perfect match. The same make, model, and color. It was parked neatly between two other cars, and from where I sat in my own vehicle I could see it perfectly. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I had misjudged the situation. Maybe I was just seeing things because I was so tired. But when I looked again, my car was still there, as real as anything else. I wasn't sure what to do. My heart started to pound in my chest. How could my car be parked there when I was driving it at that very moment? I glanced quickly between the street and my own car, trying to figure out if I was imagining it or if something truly bizarre was happening. But it wasn't a mirage, it was my car. It had to be. I slowed down, now feeling a tight knot forming in my stomach. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the car parked up ahead. As I drove, I felt like I was in some sort of strange limbo, unable to fully process what was going on. Was this a dream? Maybe I had been so stressed that my brain was playing tricks on me. But no, this wasn't just a trick of the mind. It didn't make sense. I quickly made a turn, hoping to get a better angle and see if I was mistaken. But there it was again, my car, parked in the same spot, just as I had seen it before. It was like a cruel joke being played on me. The world seemed to blur around me as I tried to make sense of the situation. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder as I tried to concentrate, but my thoughts were racing, and I could hardly keep up with them. I had to pull over. I needed to figure this out. My pulse was racing, and my breath was shallow. I found a spot to park on the opposite side of the street, and I quickly got out of the car, my feet shaky as I walked toward where my car was parked. As I got closer, I could see the familiar dents and scratches on the body, the chipped paint in a few places, the faint remnants of a sticker I had peeled off months ago. It was definitely my car, and it was parked there, unmoving. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. The world around me felt frozen, like time itself had stopped. My car was sitting there, parked just as it should be. But the fact that I was driving it only moments ago made no sense. I could feel my heart beating in my throat, my mind racing to find an explanation. But nothing made sense. I reached for my phone, intending to call anyone just to hear a familiar voice, hoping it would bring me back to some semblance of reality. My hands were trembling, and it took me a few moments to unlock the screen. I quickly called a friend, hoping that they would pick up and somehow help me make sense of this. When they answered, I could hardly find the words. "I think I'm going crazy," I said, my voice tight with anxiety. I was just driving my car, and now it's parked outside, but I'm still driving it. I don't understand what's happening." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. My friend's voice came through, calm and reassuring. "What are you talking about? You're obviously not still driving it. Where are you right now?" I glanced back at my car, still parked exactly where I had seen it before. "I'm here," I said, trying to explain. "I just pulled over to check because I saw my car parked on the side of the road. But I'm still in it. I don't know what's happening." They laughed, trying to lighten the situation. "I think you're just overthinking things. Maybe you got confused, or you're exhausted. Just go home and get some rest." I wanted to believe that, but it didn't feel like I was just exhausted or confused. It felt too real. I ended the call quickly, feeling like I was running out of time to figure this out. My mind was swimming with more questions than answers, and the longer I stood there, the less grounded I felt. I turned around and started walking back to my car, hoping that maybe I would wake up from whatever strange dream I was in. When I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat, trying to calm myself down. It was as if nothing had changed, but everything felt off. The interior was just as I had left it, messy, with papers scattered on the passenger seat, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. But the reality of seeing my car parked outside while I was still inside it made no sense. I started the engine, almost afraid that something else would happen, that the world would shift again, that I would find myself somewhere completely different. But nothing changed. The car started with a smooth hum, and the world around me remained eerily still. I drove away, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease settle into my chest. As I made my way down the road, I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, expecting to see anything that would explain what I had just experienced. But the road behind me was empty, just as it should have been. I began to convince myself that I was just overworked, too tired to think straight, that my mind had simply played a trick on me. Still, the doubt lingered, gnawing at me in the back of my mind. When I finally arrived at my destination, I parked and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the disorienting experience. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I went through the motions of my day, attending the meeting, talking to people, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't let go of what had happened. I still don't know what happened that day. I don't know if it was some kind of illusion or if my mind was simply too tired. But as I drove home that evening, I didn't see my car parked on the street again. It was just gone, like nothing had ever happened. I still wonder sometimes, though, if it was real or if I was just losing my grip on reality. Story 7. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the strange feeling of the fabric against my skin. I shifted slightly in bed, trying to shake off the drowsiness, but something was off. My clothes felt unfamiliar, rougher in places they shouldn't be, the seams poking uncomfortably into my skin. I tried to adjust them, but when I glanced down, I was shocked to see that my shirt and pants were inside out. I hadn't changed them before bed, so how could this have happened? I lay there for a moment, staring at my clothes, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't a heavy sleeper, and I definitely didn't remember getting up in the middle of the night to change anything. My mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe I had absent-mindedly gotten dressed in a rush last night, but I would have noticed that I was wearing my clothes inside out. Wouldn't I have felt it? Or maybe I had been sleepwalking, but I had never experienced anything like that before. The more I thought about it, the more the confusion grew. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom to check myself in the mirror. The cool air hit my skin as I swung my legs over the side of the bed, and I stood up, still feeling a bit disoriented. I shuffled toward the bathroom, my mind trying to reason through what was happening. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection confirmed what I had already seen. My clothes were inside out, and now that I could see them clearly, I noticed something even stranger. The seams on my shirt were much more prominent, and the stitching on my pants was oddly loose, as if they had been put together carelessly. It was as if the clothes had been deliberately turned inside out. But who would have done that? I felt a growing sense of unease wash over me. There was no way I had done this myself, not without realizing it. I reached down to pull at the hem of my shirt, as if trying to pull it back to normal, but I stopped halfway. What if something was wrong with me? What if I was losing my grip on reality and didn't remember changing my clothes? It seemed so unlikely, but the thought made my stomach churn. I shook my head, dismissing the idea. I wasn't sleepwalking, I was just tired. Maybe I had been in a daze last night, distracted or overwhelmed by something. It had been a stressful week, and the last few days had felt like a blur. I decided to change into something else and get on with my day, but as I peeled off the inside-out clothes, I noticed something else, a small tear in the sleeve of my shirt. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was definitely there. I couldn't recall how it had happened. I would have remembered ripping my shirt. It wasn't something I would have overlooked. Was it possible that something had happened overnight, something I couldn't explain? As I stood there in the bathroom, staring at my reflection and feeling more and more unsettled, my phone buzzed on the counter. I grabbed it quickly, eager to distract myself from the growing anxiety that was threatening to take over. The message was from a friend, but the timing felt off. The message said simply, "Did you find your clothes yet?" I stared at the screen, the words hanging in the air as if mocking me. How did she know about my clothes? I hadn't told anyone about what I had woken up to. The message felt too specific, too uncanny, and I felt a sudden surge of panic. It was as though she had known before I even realized what had happened. I quickly typed back, asking her what she meant, but the reply came almost immediately. "You didn't notice," she wrote. "The clothes, the way you were dressed last night. Did you forget?" My fingers froze over the keys as a chill ran down my spine. I didn't remember anything unusual about last night. I had gone to bed like usual, fallen asleep quickly, and woke up to find my clothes inside out. Was she messing with me? Or was there something more going on here? I sat on the edge of the bathroom sink, holding my phone in my hands as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. My heart raced as the unanswered questions swirled around in my mind. What was happening? Why did she know about my clothes? I decided to call her, desperate to get some clarity. But before I could dial her number, the phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call from her. My breath caught in my throat as I quickly answered it. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, trying to sound calm even though I felt anything but. There was a pause on the other end of the line before she spoke. "You're really confused, aren't you?" Her voice was strange, softer than usual, almost as if she was speaking carefully, like she was waiting for me to catch up with something she already knew. "I didn't want to freak you out, but last night you left the party early, remember?" I froze. The party. I had forgotten all about it. I had gone to a friend's gathering the previous night, but I couldn't remember much of it. In fact, all I could recall was arriving there, chatting with a few people, and then suddenly feeling exhausted. But I had no memory of leaving. Did I really leave early? I racked my brain, trying to piece together the events of the night, but nothing came to mind. It was as if my memory had just vanished. "Do you remember anything else from last night?" she asked, her voice full of concern now. "You were acting strange, like you were in a daze. You kept talking about something happening to your clothes. You even said that you didn't remember putting them on the right way." My head spun. I didn't remember any of this. I had no recollection of talking to her about my clothes or acting strange. It was all completely foreign to me. How could I have said those things without realizing it? "I didn't want to mention it over text," she continued, "but when I saw you at the party you seemed off. Like you were in a trance or something. It wasn't like you. And when you left, you didn't even seem to notice that you were walking in the wrong direction, heading away from your car instead of toward it." Everything she was saying sounded like it was coming from a dream. My mind was struggling to connect the dots, but nothing fit together. It was as if the pieces of my memory had been scattered, leaving only fragments behind. I asked her to tell me more, to explain what had happened at the party, but she just kept repeating how strange I had seemed and how she had noticed something was wrong. Eventually the conversation trailed off and she told me she'd check in later. I hung up the phone, still reeling from what I had just heard. My mind was racing, trying to process everything she had said. The clothes being inside out, the memory of the night before slipping away, none of it made sense. I stood in the bathroom for what felt like an eternity, trying to understand what was happening to me. And then, with sudden clarity, a thought hit me like a ton of bricks. What if I wasn't the only one who had been affected? What if something had happened to me that I couldn't control, something beyond my understanding? My clothes weren't just inside out, they were a sign of something more, something I couldn't yet comprehend. But in that moment, I realized one thing: I needed answers. And I was determined to find them, no matter what. Story 8. I had been spending the afternoon at home, working on a few tasks, when I received an unusual voicemail. I wasn't expecting any calls, so I was curious about what it might be. I checked my phone, pressing the play button, and immediately my stomach dropped. The first thing I heard was the sound of my front door creaking open, followed by a soft shuffle of footsteps. My heart raced. I had been home alone all day and I hadn't heard anything. No one had entered my house, and certainly no one had opened the door. I froze for a moment, listening to the faint noise that seemed to echo through my mind. The voicemail continued for a few more seconds, with no voice or words, just the eerie sounds of the door moving and the faint rustling of footsteps. Then, the voicemail abruptly cut off. I stared at my phone, feeling a wave of dread wash over me. How could this have happened? I didn't know what to think. It had to be some sort of mistake, maybe a glitch. I decided to ignore it at first, thinking that I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The door had definitely opened. I could hear it clearly, the distinct sound of the old wooden door creaking, and the footsteps. Those footsteps sounded so real, so close. I glanced toward the entrance, half expecting someone to be standing there, but the hallway was empty. I felt an odd mix of confusion and fear. I checked my phone again, but there was no new message, just the one voicemail. I hesitated, debating whether I should check the front door. I didn't want to overreact, but the unease gnawed at me. I stood up slowly and walked toward the front door, my footsteps muffled against the floor as I moved. I reached the door and peeked through the peephole, but I didn't see anything. The porch was empty, the neighborhood quiet as usual. No one was around. I opened the door, looking both ways along the street, but there was no sign of anyone. No unusual cars parked on the road, no strange figures lurking in the shadows. Everything appeared normal, but the sense of something being off lingered. I checked the door to make sure it was locked. It had been when I came inside earlier, but I double-checked, turning the handle to be sure. It clicked in place as I locked it once more, and the unease that had been building inside me seemed to calm down a little. But it wasn't gone. The voicemail still echoed in my mind. It was a recording, not a live call, which meant someone had been inside my house, or at least near it, while I was away from the door. The fact that there was no sign of anyone made everything feel worse. It was as if someone had gotten in and left without leaving a trace. I sat back down on the couch, my mind racing. Was someone watching me? Was this some kind of sick prank? I didn't know who would do such a thing, but the thought of it made my skin crawl. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself that it was nothing. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the sound had been picked up from outside, or maybe the voicemail was just a technical glitch, some random noise that sounded like my front door. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I decided to listen to the voicemail again, hoping I might hear something I missed the first time. I played it back, the same eerie sound of the door opening, followed by the soft shuffle of footsteps. I listened carefully, but there was nothing more. No other sounds. No voices. The message was clear, simple, and chilling. It made me feel exposed, like someone knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. I had no idea how to process it. I checked the security cameras I had around the house, hoping they had picked up something. I didn't have cameras on every side of the house, but I had one on the front porch and one in the living room, aimed at the front door. I pulled up the feed, expecting to see something that would explain the strange voicemail. But when I scrolled through the footage, there was nothing. The front porch was empty for the entire afternoon, and the living room camera showed no sign of anyone entering the house. The door had not opened at all on the camera feed. Nothing. A cold sweat started to form on the back of my neck. I couldn't understand how this could be. How could there be a voicemail with the sound of my door opening, but no one in the house? No one on the cameras? My mind started to feel like it was unraveling. It was as if I was being gaslit by reality itself. Something didn't add up, but I couldn't figure out what. I paced the living room, trying to make sense of it all. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I had no evidence of a break-in, and nothing had been taken. The door had opened, but there was no sign of forced entry. It could all just be in my head, some trick of the mind. But I wasn't sure. What if someone had been in my house? What if they were still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike? The thought made me feel vulnerable, exposed. I sat back down again, this time taking a deep breath. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just a weird glitch, a trick of the mind, maybe a prank call. I could dismiss it, ignore it, and move on. But the feeling of unease stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I checked the voicemail once more, hoping I had missed something important, but it was the same as before. No new information, no voices, just the sounds of the door opening and the soft shuffle of footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my home, even if I couldn't prove it. I didn't know what to do next. Should I set up more cameras, increase the security around my home? And should I tell someone about what happened? But who would believe me? It was all so strange and unsettling, and I didn't know where to turn. I decided to try and get some sleep, hoping that a clear head in the morning would give me a better perspective. But when I lay in bed, the sounds of the voicemail played over and over in my mind. The door opening, the footsteps, the unsettling silence after. The following morning, I woke up early and checked the security footage again, just to be sure I hadn't missed anything. But everything was as it had been before, empty, quiet, and uneventful. I sighed, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that I was just overreacting. But the sense of something being wrong lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't go away. It was as if something had happened that I couldn't explain, and no matter how much I tried to push it aside, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, even now. I don't know if I'll ever get to the bottom of what happened that day. The voicemail, the sound of my door opening, the footsteps, it all feels like a bad dream. Something I should have woken up from by now. But I know one thing for sure, I can never shake the feeling that something or someone was inside my house that day, and I'll never know exactly what it was. Story 9. It was around 11 p.m. when I got home from work. The day had been long, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening. I tossed my bag on the couch and kicked off my shoes, then went to the kitchen to grab something to eat. As I passed by the entryway, I noticed the light on my doorbell camera was flashing, indicating that there had been motion detected. It was unusual. I didn't expect anyone, so I picked up my phone to check the footage. The video feed from the camera showed a person standing right in front of my door. They were just standing there, perfectly still, for what seemed like minutes. The image was clear enough to see the figure was wearing a dark hoodie, but what made me stop and stare was that their face was completely blurred, like a strange digital glitch. No matter how much I zoomed in or replayed the footage, I couldn't make out a single detail of their face. It was as though the camera simply couldn't capture them properly, almost like they didn't belong in the frame at all. I stared at the footage for a few moments, trying to make sense of it. The figure didn't seem to move, just stood there, right in front of the door. I watched closely, looking for any hint that could explain why the person's face was blurred. Maybe it was a glitch with the camera or some weird trick of the light. But no, the rest of the video seemed fine. It was just that one spot, their face, that refused to be clear. I opened the door to see if anyone was still out there, but the porch was empty. My heart started to race. I checked the timestamp on the footage just a few minutes ago. They couldn't have gone far, could they? But when I looked around, there was no sign of anyone on the street, no one walking away, no footsteps in the grass. I closed the door and locked it, though I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. What had just happened? I sat down on the couch, trying to calm my nerves. Was it possible that I had imagined it? Maybe I was just exhausted from a long day. But the footage didn't lie. There was definitely someone standing there. I started to doubt my own perception of reality, unsure of whether I was missing something or if something truly strange was happening. The phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from a friend asking if I wanted to hang out. I quickly typed a response, telling them I was too tired but appreciated the offer. My mind kept drifting back to the camera footage. I couldn't help but wonder who that person was and why their face was blurred. It felt like something out of a movie, something unnatural that I couldn't explain. The next day, I was still shaken by the events of the previous night. I woke up early and went through the footage again, hoping to find something I had missed. But when I pulled up the video, I saw that it had been deleted. I swiped down to refresh the camera feed, but the video file was gone. Panic gripped me. I hadn't deleted it. I hadn't touched the phone after watching it last night. I immediately checked the app to see if there was some sort of malfunction, or if the footage had been erased automatically for some reason. But everything looked fine, and the app didn't indicate that anything had been deleted. The only explanation was that someone else had accessed it. But how? I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. I had locked the door, checked all the windows, and had been careful to make sure everything was secure. So how was this happening? A few days passed, and the feeling of unease grew stronger. Every time I passed by the front door, I would glance at the camera, almost expecting to see the same blurry figure standing there again. But nothing happened. The camera remained silent, and the night passed without incident. Still, the image of that figure, standing motionless at my door, wouldn't leave my mind. One night I received another alert on my phone. It was almost the same as last time motion detected at my front door. I immediately pulled up the footage, half expecting to see that same blurry figure. But this time there was nothing. No person, no motion, just the empty space in front of my door. I thought maybe I was just seeing things, but I knew I had received the alert for a reason. The next morning, I woke up to a strange discovery. There were faint footprints leading up to my front door, visible in the light of dawn. The grass was damp from the night's dew, and yet there they were, perfectly imprinted in the ground, as though someone had stood there just hours before. I could feel my heart skip a beat. The prints were still fresh, but the thing that unsettled me the most was that they didn't lead away from my door. They stopped at the front step, and then nothing. There was no trail beyond that. I had to know what was going on. I contacted the company that operated the doorbell camera to ask if they had any insights into the footage I had seen. They told me that the camera had experienced a technical glitch, explaining the blurred face. They also confirmed that the footage had been deleted, but it wasn't because of any malfunction. According to them, there was a security feature that automatically deleted older footage once it reached a certain storage limit. I found it hard to believe, though. Why had the footage been deleted so quickly? As I questioned the company's explanations, I tried to make sense of the strange occurrences that had been happening. Was someone trying to mess with me, or was I simply losing my mind? Maybe I had been imagining things, but the footprints, the deleted footage, and the figure at my door, none of that felt like a coincidence. A week later, I had another unexpected experience. I was sitting on the couch when I heard a soft knock on my front door. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether I should answer it. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I wanted to open that door again. But the knock came again, louder this time. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. There, standing on my porch, was the same figure. They were wearing a dark hoodie again, and I couldn't make out their face. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. I quickly checked the doorbell camera, but the feed was blank. There was nothing. I stood there for a moment, frozen, not knowing what to do. Then, the doorbell rang. I didn't move. My heart raced as I stood in the middle of my living room, not wanting to make a sound. The ringing continued, but it felt distant, almost as if it was coming from somewhere else. I took a deep breath and carefully peeked out the window beside my door. To my surprise, there was no one on the porch. I stood there for a few moments, trying to understand what had just happened. The doorbell rang again, but this time I heard it clearly inside my house. The sound wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was as though the ringing was echoing from somewhere else, somewhere deep inside the house. I turned to look behind me. The door was closed, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. But as I walked towards the hallway, I noticed something strange. On the wall near the staircase, there was a faint, barely noticeable smudge like someone had touched it with their hand. The same dark streak was on the wall near the door. I was no longer sure of anything. I had heard the doorbell ring, seen the figure, and now this. It was as if something or someone was trying to make their presence known, but always just out of reach. Story 10. I was on my usual morning jog. The cold air nipping at my face, and the sound of my feet hitting the pavement was steady, rhythmic. I had been running for about 15 minutes, enjoying the peace of the quiet neighborhood, when I noticed a jogger ahead of me. He wasn't moving particularly fast, but he seemed to be keeping a steady pace. I wasn't in a rush, just trying to get through my morning routine, when something strange happened. As he passed me, he leaned in, close enough for me to hear his breath, and whispered, "Keep going, they're behind you." The words hit me like a shock to the system. My body immediately tensed and my mind raced. Who was he talking about? Who was behind me? My first instinct was to dismiss it, to tell myself it was some strange coincidence or a jogger making a comment as part of a weird morning routine. But something in the way he spoke, the urgency in his voice, made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head and keep running. I quickened my pace, trying to outrun the unsettling feeling that had settled in my chest. The streets were still quiet, with only the sound of my footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me, but there was nothing. No one. The street was empty, the usual calm of the morning unmarred by the presence of another jogger or a car passing by. Yet the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I kept running, my breath coming quicker now, mind spinning. Was I just imagining things? Like it had been a joke or a fluke? But why did it feel so real? The jogger's words were clear in my mind, echoing through my thoughts with each step. "Keep going, they're behind you." It felt like a warning, like someone knew something I didn't, like there was something chasing me, something I couldn't see. The thought was ridiculous, I told myself. There was nothing there. I was just being paranoid. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The road ahead seemed quieter than usual, the houses along the street just a little too still. The wind had died down, and the only sound left was my breathing and the occasional tap of my feet against the pavement. I kept running, my pace steadily increasing, my muscles burning as I pushed myself harder. But no matter how fast I ran, the feeling of being followed remained. It was as if there was something just behind me, something I couldn't quite identify, but that was always there, just out of sight. I glanced over my shoulder again, but this time I was almost certain I saw something. A shadow, fleeting but distinct, moved across the sidewalk behind me. It wasn't enough to confirm that anyone was there, but the feeling that I wasn't alone intensified. My heart raced faster, and I pushed myself even harder, determined to get away, to outrage whatever was behind me. But as I turned the next corner, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, matching my pace. There was no mistaking it now. Someone or something was following me. I froze for a moment, my feet planted firmly on the ground. My mind raced, and I struggled to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was just another jogger, someone who had decided to pick up their pace when they saw me running ahead. But the footsteps didn't sound quite right. They were too close, too deliberate. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I strained to hear them. It was a steady rhythm, almost synchronized with my own. But when I looked over my shoulder, there was no one there. I couldn't take it anymore. My body screamed for me to stop, to turn around and confront whatever was following me. But I kept running, faster now, pushing through the growing fear. The streets around me blurred as I concentrated on the sound of my own footsteps, trying to block out the unsettling sound of the footsteps behind me. Every corner I turned, every street I passed, the sound was still there. It wasn't just in my head. I wasn't imagining it. Someone or something was there. I was close to home now, only a few blocks away. My heart pounded in my chest, my legs aching from the relentless pace. But I refused to slow down. I couldn't. I couldn't afford to. If I stopped, if I turned around, I didn't know what might happen. The thought of looking behind me, of confirming the presence of whatever was chasing me, was too terrifying. I was almost at my front door when I heard it again. The jogger's voice, low and urgent, came out of nowhere. "Keep going. They're behind you." I reached my front door in a blur, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. The moment I stepped inside, I slammed the door shut, locking it quickly and bolting it for good measure. I stood there for a moment, breathless, my mind reeling from the experience. What had just happened? Had I really been followed? Who was the jogger, and what had he meant by his words? I didn't know what to believe anymore. Everything felt so surreal, so confusing. I stood in my hallway, trying to calm my racing heart, my eyes glued to the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. But nothing happened. The house was silent. There was no one outside. No footsteps, no shadows, nothing. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread as I realized that whatever I had experienced, whatever I had felt, wasn't real. It had to be in my head, right? But as I stood there, still catching my breath, I noticed something strange. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, was flashing with a new notification. I walked over, my curiosity piqued, and picked it up. It was a message, an unknown number, just 3 words: "Keep going. They're behind you." I dropped the phone in shock, my blood running cold. How could they know? How could anyone know? Story 11. Int 11. It had been a long, exhausting day. After a week of endless meetings, deadlines, and tasks piling up, I was finally looking forward to some quiet time in my bedroom. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. The lamp had always been a comfort, its warm light offering a sense of calm after a chaotic day. I flopped onto the bed, grabbed my phone, and began scrolling, hoping to lose myself in something, anything, to distract me from the weight of everything that had been happening recently. As I lay there, my eyes grew heavy, and I fought the pull of sleep. I had just started to drift off when the soft hum of the lamp suddenly stopped. I looked up, puzzled. The light was off. It wasn't a flicker or a dimming effect like I sometimes saw when the bulb was about to go out. It was just gone. I thought perhaps the bulb had burnt out, or maybe the switch was faulty. I got up, irritated by the sudden darkness, and reached for the lamp switch on the wall beside the bed. I flipped the switch back on, expecting to see the familiar soft glow, but as the lamp flickered back to life, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Something was wrong. My chair, the one I always kept at my desk, was now facing the bed. I couldn't understand it. It had been positioned the other way, facing the desk. It was not only out of place, but positioned in such a way that it seemed to be staring directly at me, its backrest turned toward the bed, as if someone or something had been sitting there. I didn't move at first. I just stared at the chair, my mind racing. Had I moved it earlier and forgotten? No, I was sure I hadn't. I was certain it had been facing the desk when I last saw it. The room felt colder now, the air heavier. I swallowed hard and took a few steps closer to the chair. I could feel my heart beat in my throat as I approached, unsure of what I was about to find. The lamp on the nightstand flickered again, casting strange shadows across the room. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers brushing the arm of the chair. I wondered if I was imagining things or if I had somehow subconsciously moved it without realizing. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. The chair was too far from the desk to have just shifted on its own. It felt wrong. I stood there for a while, my eyes locked on the chair, trying to make sense of what was happening. I convinced myself that it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. I turned away and walked toward the bed, hoping to distract myself with something else. I pulled the covers up and sat back down, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in my chest. But even as I sat there, I couldn't get the image of the chair out of my head. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed impossible. I knew I hadn't moved it, and there was no one else in the room. The air around me felt thick, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I decided to get up again, walking slowly toward the chair, and with a deep breath, I turned it back to face the desk. It didn't make me feel any better. The room still felt off, like something was lurking just out of sight. I sat back down on the bed and grabbed my phone, attempting to focus on something else to push the unease away, but I couldn't concentrate. Every so often my eyes would dart toward the chair, and I'd feel a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. The lamp, which had gone off earlier, was now flickering more often, the soft light dimming and brightening in erratic intervals. It was as if the lamp itself was trying to communicate something to me, or perhaps something else was trying to make its presence known. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, trying to convince myself that it was just the stress. I'd had a tough week, I hadn't been sleeping well, and maybe my mind was just overactive. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The lamp turning off by itself, the chair moving, the strange feeling in the air, none of it made sense. I had to get up again. I switched the lamp off, hoping that the sudden darkness might make me feel less anxious. I stood in the dark for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I was trying to calm myself down, telling myself that everything was fine, that nothing had really changed. But when I flicked the lamp back on again, I felt that same weight in the room, as if the air had thickened and my breath caught in my throat. I looked over at the chair. It was back where it had been before, facing the bed once again. It was as if it had never been moved. I couldn't make sense of it. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Perhaps it was the wind. Maybe the house was settling. Or maybe I had just been too tired to remember exactly how things were. But deep inside, I knew that something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. The lamp flickered again, and this time, the shadows seemed to stretch farther across the walls. I stood still, staring at the chair, my eyes wide in disbelief. My heart raced and my palms were sweating. What was going on? Why was this happening? I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a moment, hoping that when I opened them again, everything would be normal, that I would be able to explain it away. But when I opened my eyes, the chair was still facing the bed. I couldn't breathe. I felt trapped, like I couldn't escape the weight of what was happening. The room felt too small, and I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. My mind screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't know how long I stood there, my eyes fixed on the chair, unable to look away. The lamp flickered once more, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer this time. Then, as if everything had been leading up to that moment, the air in the room shifted. The temperature dropped, and I felt an icy chill run down my spine. It was as if the room had become something else entirely, a space where the rules no longer applied. Finally, I moved. Slowly, deliberately, I walked out of the room, leaving the chair and the lamp behind me. I didn't look back, afraid of what I might see. I couldn't explain it, couldn't understand what had just happened, but one thing was clear. The room was no longer the safe, familiar space it had once been, and I couldn't bring myself to go back in just yet. Story 12. I had just arrived at the park, the crisp air filling my lungs as I walked along the gravel path. The place was quiet, the usual chatter and laughter of children absent for the moment. I enjoyed the rare peace, especially on weekends when the park was usually crowded with families, dogs, and people jogging along the trails. I had planned on a quick visit, a few minutes of solitude before heading back to my busy life. As I made my way to the swings, I spotted a child sitting on a bench not too far off. Their gaze was fixed on me, and it took me a moment to realize they were watching me intently. I stopped in my tracks, unsure of what to do. The child, no older than 8 or 9, had an odd calmness about them. Their expression was curious, almost like they knew something I didn't. I glanced around, half expecting to see a parent nearby, but the area was still and empty. The child, dressed in a bright yellow jacket and jeans, tilted their head slightly, their eyes narrowing as if studying me. I smiled politely, unsure of why I felt so unsettled by their stare. And then, the child spoke, breaking the silence. "Your other friend is waiting," they said clearly, their voice high-pitched but calm. My heart skipped a beat, the words hanging in the air like a cold gust of wind. I stood there, frozen for a moment, as I tried to make sense of what they had said. My mind raced. Other friend. I came alone. There was no one else I knew in the park, no one I was meeting. I hadn't even texted anyone about coming here. I glanced again at the empty benches, the wide open spaces, looking for any sign of someone else, but there was nothing. The child continued to stare at me, their gaze unwavering, like they were waiting for me to react. I couldn't tell if they were joking or if they truly knew something I didn't. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "I don't have any other friends here," I said, my voice coming out shakier than I intended. The words felt strange in my mouth, almost as if I was trying to convince myself as much as the child. I took a step back, ready to turn and walk away, but the child's next words stopped me in my tracks. "They're waiting over there." The child pointed toward the far side of the park, where a row of trees stood tall, their branches bare against the gray sky. My stomach twisted, a tight knot forming in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't seen anyone over there. The area looked as empty as the rest of the park. There was no one waiting, no one but me and the child. I tried to brush off the feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe the child was just mistaken, or perhaps they were playing some kind of game. I gave a half-hearted smile, nodding. "Thank you," I said, though the words felt hollow. I quickly turned around and walked in the opposite direction, hoping the child would forget about me, leave me to enjoy my time alone. But the child's gaze stayed on me, following my every movement. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning with intensity. I walked to the swings, trying to shake off the unease settling in my chest. I sat down, the chains creaking as I gently pushed myself back and forth, trying to calm my nerves. The child's words echoed in my mind. "Your other friend is waiting." I tried to rationalize it, to come up with an explanation that made sense. Maybe it was some sort of mistake, or perhaps the child had confused me with someone else. But the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Why would they say something like that to a complete stranger? I looked around again, more cautiously this time, scanning the park for any sign of another person. But the park remained as quiet and empty as before. No one in sight. Just me, the child, and the gentle swaying of the swings. My skin prickled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something wasn't quite right. I needed to leave. I stood up abruptly, pushing the swing away and walking toward the park's exit, my footsteps quick and heavy. As I neared the entrance, I glanced back one last time. The child was still sitting on the bench, their yellow jacket a bright flash against the muted surroundings. They hadn't moved. But now as I watched, I noticed something strange. The child's expression had changed. Their face was no longer calm, but there was an odd, knowing look in their eyes, like they were watching me as I walked away. Something about it made my heart race. My skin felt cold. I quickened my pace, my breath coming faster as I reached the gate. When I got to my car, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The feeling of being watched lingered, though I told myself it was just the odd interaction with the child. But as I started the engine and looked in the rearview mirror, something made me freeze. For just a moment I thought I saw a figure standing by the trees in the distance, where the child had pointed. My eyes widened, and I looked again, but the figure was gone. I couldn't help but wonder, had there been someone waiting there all along? Had the child really known something I didn't, or had it been a trick of my imagination? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just overthinking the whole situation. But as I drove away from the park, the feeling of unease still gripped me, and I couldn't escape the thought that something wasn't right. The child's words replayed in my mind. "Your other friend is waiting," but I still had no idea who they meant. Story 13. I walked into the store on a quiet afternoon, the kind where the lighting seemed a bit too dim and the shelves looked almost deserted. I was looking for something to buy, maybe a new pair of shoes, when I noticed a familiar jacket hanging on one of the racks. It wasn't just any jacket, it was my jacket. The one I had been wearing for the past year. I paused for a moment, squinting at the fabric, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. But there it was, hanging neatly among the other clothes. The exact same shade of deep navy blue with the same stitching on the collar. It was uncanny. I stepped closer, my heart beating a little faster as I ran my fingers over the fabric. The texture was identical, down to the small faded spots near the cuffs where I had spilled coffee a few months ago. The jacket looked new, untouched by time or wear, yet it was unmistakably the same as mine. I looked at the price tag, hoping it would offer some explanation, but it only made things more confusing. The price seemed far too low for a jacket of that quality. It didn't add up. There was no way they could be selling the same exact jacket, in the same exact condition, for a fraction of what I paid for it. I glanced around the store, as though expecting someone to jump out and tell me this was all part of some elaborate joke. But the place was quiet. The few customers that were in the store didn't seem to notice me staring at the jacket. I turned it around to examine the back, trying to figure out if there was any difference at all between the one on the rack and the one I was wearing. There was none. Every detail was the same, the stitching, the zipper, even the tag inside, which had always been a bit scratched from constant use. I reached out and touched it, the fabric smooth under my fingertips. It felt just like mine. The shock started to set in. My mind raced with questions. Could someone have seen me wear it and created an identical copy? Or had I somehow wandered into some parallel reality where my exact jacket had been replicated? The thought of the jacket having a twin one that looked exactly like it, right down to the smallest detail, felt strange, like something out of a dream. I looked at the jacket once more, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. Maybe it wasn't as strange as it seemed. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But deep down, something told me it wasn't. I tried to tell myself that it was simply a jacket that looked similar. But the more I looked at it, the less that explanation seemed to make sense. I couldn't take my eyes off it, feeling like I was stuck in some kind of loop where my own belongings were out of my control. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I decided to leave. I didn't buy anything, not even the jacket, though I had every intention of picking it up at first. My steps were quick as I walked toward the exit, my mind still spinning with confusion. As I reached the door, I glanced back one last time. To my horror, the jacket was still there, hanging perfectly on the rack, just like before. But now, it didn't just feel like an identical copy, it felt like something more. Something that had no business being there. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the store, about the jacket. Had I missed something? Had I imagined the whole thing? My own jacket was sitting on the chair by my desk, the familiar weight of it comforting in some strange way. But every time I looked at it, the image of the other jacket hung in my mind, unsettling me in ways I couldn't explain. Could I have walked into that store and seen something I wasn't supposed to see? Was there some hidden connection between the jacket I had and the one in the store? The next morning, I found myself back at the store, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I walked in cautiously, scanning the racks, almost expecting to see that same jacket waiting for me. But it was gone. The rack where I had seen it the day before was completely empty. I asked one of the employees about it, trying to sound casual, but they didn't seem to know what I was talking about. There was no jacket like the one I had seen, no similar design, no exact match. It felt like I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew I hadn't. I left the store feeling more confused than ever, but the unease stayed with me. Over the following days, I thought about the jacket more and more. I looked at my own jacket, wondering if it was truly mine or if I had somehow been duped into thinking it was. But no matter how many times I checked, it still felt like my jacket, the one I had worn so many times. Yet the memory of the duplicate jacket lingered in my mind like a puzzle that didn't have an answer. Weeks passed, and life returned to its usual pace. I went to work, ran errands, and spent time with friends, but the thought of the jacket never quite left me. I tried to push it out of my mind, telling myself it was just a strange coincidence, that I had probably seen a jacket that looked similar and gotten carried away with my thoughts. But deep inside, I knew something had happened that I couldn't explain. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that the world around me was a little bit stranger than I had realized. One evening, after another busy day, I sat down on the couch, exhausted but restless. I reached for the remote control and started flipping through channels absent-mindedly. But then, I saw something that made my heart race. It was a news segment, a report about a robbery that had taken place in a nearby neighborhood. As the camera panned over the scene, something caught my eye, a pile of clothes that had been left behind by the thief. And there, sitting at the top of the pile, was the exact same jacket I had seen in the store. I froze. My mind raced to make sense of the sight, the connection between the jacket on the pile and the one I had seen in the store. How could it be the same? Had the thief taken it from the same store? Or was there something else going on? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. The jacket I had seen wasn't just a coincidence. It was part of something much larger, something that was still unfolding in ways I didn't understand. As the news segment ended, I couldn't look away. The jacket remained in my thoughts, a lingering mystery that I couldn't escape. What did it all mean? And why did it feel like I had become a part of something I had no control over? I didn't have answers, but I knew this much. The jacket I had seen in that store wasn't just an identical copy, it was a piece of a puzzle that I still hadn't solved. Story 14. I woke up early, as usual, with a dull ache in my neck from a restless sleep. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds as I stretched and groggily made my way to the bathroom. My day hadn't even started yet, but I already felt the weight of exhaustion settling on my shoulders. I reached for my toothbrush, only to find that it wasn't there. A strange knot twisted in my stomach as I searched the sink, then the countertop, and the nearby drawer, but it was nowhere to be found. Confused, I turned around to look at the rest of the bathroom. Was I just overlooking it? I walked over to the shower, even though I didn't think it would be in there, but my mind was racing. Maybe I had moved it last night and forgotten about it. It didn't make any sense. I couldn't recall putting it anywhere unusual. I stood there for a moment trying to piece together what had happened. My toothbrush was always in the same place. Always. Yet, it was now completely missing. I retraced my steps, thinking about the evening before. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I hadn't been in the bathroom much, except to wash up before bed, but there was no reason for my toothbrush to be missing. I glanced at the clock. I was already running late. With a sigh, I gave up on searching the bathroom and decided to brush my teeth with my spare toothbrush, which I kept in the cabinet. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do for now. After getting dressed and eating a quick breakfast, I left the house. The whole day went by in a blur. At work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I tried to focus on a task, my mind wandered back to the toothbrush. It was such a small, trivial thing, but it nagged at me. Who would take my toothbrush? And why? It felt like a mystery, one I couldn't ignore, even though I had no real reason to be concerned. When I came home that evening, I immediately headed to the bathroom to get ready for bed. The day had been long and I was exhausted. As I opened the bathroom door, I froze. There, sitting on the edge of the sink, was my toothbrush. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was unmistakably mine. I picked it up and felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It had been missing this morning, yet now it was back, sitting innocently in the same spot where I had last seen it. But something about it felt off. It wasn't just the fact that it had returned, it was the way it had returned. I hadn't left it there. I hadn't touched it since I found it missing that morning. My mind raced. What was going on? How had it ended up there? I was the only one who lived in the house, and no one had been in my bathroom since last night. I searched around the bathroom again, half expecting to find something else unusual, but everything else seemed in place. As I stood there, staring at the toothbrush in my hand, I felt an uneasy tingling sensation run through my body. I shook it off, telling myself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe I had moved it myself without thinking, or maybe it had just somehow slipped out of sight. But no matter how many times I tried to explain it away, the feeling of something being wrong wouldn't go away. I opened the fridge, thinking I might grab a drink before bed. As I reached for the bottle of water, something caught my eye. There, tucked neatly in the back corner of the fridge, was my toothbrush. My heart stopped for a second. How did it get in there? It wasn't like I could have put it there by mistake. The fridge was the last place I would have put it, and yet there it was, sitting innocently among the food items. I felt my throat tighten, and I quickly pulled it out, staring at it in disbelief. I stood frozen for a few moments, holding the toothbrush in my hand, trying to make sense of the situation. Had I been sleepwalking? But no, I would have remembered something like that. There was no way I had absent-mindedly placed it in the fridge. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or a neighbor, but then the thought occurred to me. What if I was the one who had done it? What if something strange was happening to me, something I couldn't explain? I took the toothbrush and placed it back in the bathroom, still feeling a chill run through me. It didn't seem like a simple mistake. It felt like something more, something unsettling that I couldn't quite grasp. My mind kept racing, but no answers came. I stared at the bathroom door for a while, wondering if I was losing my grip on reality. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe there was something else going on that I couldn't explain. That night, I slept fitfully. Every little noise seemed louder, every movement outside my window more noticeable. I kept imagining that someone was in the house with me, though I knew that wasn't possible. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept thinking about my toothbrush, wondering why it had ended up in the fridge. It was such a bizarre thing to happen, yet I couldn't deny that it had. The next morning, I woke up and went to the bathroom again, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. I brushed my teeth, but I couldn't help glancing around the room every few seconds, expecting something else to be out of place. When I checked the counter, I was relieved to see that nothing had changed. My toothbrush was in its usual spot. But as I prepared to leave, I glanced into the kitchen and saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The fridge door was slightly open. I could see inside from where I was standing, and I noticed something strange. There was a small smear of toothpaste on the shelf near the back. I walked over to the fridge, my hands trembling. Sure enough, there was a faint trace of toothpaste, as if it had been squeezed out, but I hadn't used it. At that moment, everything clicked. The feeling that something was wrong, the toothbrush in the fridge, the smear of toothpaste, it all started to make sense. I wasn't imagining it. Someone else had been in my house, in my bathroom, and they had touched my things. But who? And why? It was a question that would continue to haunt me for days. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was happening, something I didn't understand, and I had no idea how to stop it. Story 15. I was running late, as usual. The subway station was crowded, and I found myself wedged between commuters, the noise of the train's arrival blending with the hustle of the morning rush. The train screeched to a halt, and the doors slid open. I stepped inside, scanning for an empty spot to stand in. It wasn't until the train had started moving, the hum of the wheels on the track filling the space, that I noticed her. She was sitting in the corner seat, an older woman, her face partially obscured by the large brim of her hat. She wasn't looking at anyone in particular, just staring straight ahead, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I thought nothing of her at first. She was just another face in the sea of people, another passenger on their way to wherever. But then, out of nowhere, she turned slightly toward me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an uncomfortable chill run down my spine. I didn't look away, not at first. There was something in her gaze, something intense, something unnerving that made me feel like she could see straight through me. Then, she did something I wasn't expecting. Slowly, almost deliberately, she reached into her bag, pulled out a small folded note, and extended it toward me. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. I wasn't one for interacting with strangers, especially on the subway, but there was something about the way she held the note, the way her eyes never left mine, that made it impossible to ignore. I reluctantly took the note from her, my fingers brushing against hers briefly as I did. She didn't say a word, just continued staring at me, her expression unreadable. Without a second thought, I unfolded the note and read the message written inside. Not today. Not today. My heart skipped a beat. The message was simple, just those 3 words. But it felt like they carried so much weight, like a warning or a command. I looked up at her, but she had already turned her attention back to the window, her hands resting calmly in her lap once again. Her face was unreadable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for something, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to do something. I didn't know what to make of it. I had never seen this woman before in my life, and yet, there she was, handing me a note that felt too personal, too deliberate. I glanced around the subway car, but no one else seemed to be paying attention to us. Everyone was lost in their own little worlds, their faces buried in their phones or staring blankly at the passing stations. It was as if the woman and I were in our own little bubble, separated from the rest of the world. I tried to focus on the note, but the words kept swirling in my mind. Not today. What did it mean? Was it meant for me specifically, or was it just some random message she handed to everyone on the train? It didn't feel random. It felt too intentional, too personal. The more I thought about it, the more I felt a sense of dread settle in my chest. It was as if the note was a warning, like there was something I was supposed to be avoiding, something I wasn't seeing. I could feel my anxiety rising, and I looked around the train again, half expecting to see something, anything that might explain the woman's actions. But there was nothing. Just the same faces, the same indifferent passengers. I felt like I was losing touch with reality, as if the note had taken me to a different place entirely, one where I was no longer in control. As the train made its way through the tunnels, I tried to push the feeling out of my mind. I folded the note and stuffed it into my pocket, not sure what to do with it. The woman hadn't said anything else. She hadn't even made a sound since handing me the note. She just sat there, as if nothing unusual had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about what she had written. The words echoed in my mind over and over again. Not today. What was she trying to tell me? What was it that I wasn't supposed to do? I was afraid to ask, afraid to break the silence between us. I felt a strange urge to get off at the next stop, to escape the weight of the moment. But I stayed, unwilling to let the mysterious encounter dictate my actions. The train's movement became a constant background noise, a reminder that I had no control over what was happening. Eventually, the train started slowing down, signaling that my stop was approaching. I knew I had to leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced at the woman one last time, but she was no longer looking at me. She had returned to her own quiet world, her face expressionless as she stared ahead. I turned toward the door, the anxiety in my chest growing stronger. But as the train pulled into my station, I felt a sudden compulsion to turn back. Just before I stepped off, I looked at the woman one last time. This time she was watching me, her gaze heavy and unwavering. I felt the weight of her eyes on me as I stepped off the train and onto the platform, the echo of her unspoken message still ringing in my ears. Not today. I couldn't shake the thought that the message wasn't about today at all. It was a message for something much bigger, something that was yet to come. But whatever it was, I knew it was out of my hands. All I could do was move forward and try to forget. As I walked away from the subway station, I could feel the weight of the note still in my pocket. The woman's words followed me, but I chose to ignore them. I couldn't let them control me. But as the day went on, as the hours passed, I realized something. I hadn't seen the woman again. I hadn't seen her anywhere in the city. It was as if she had vanished just as mysteriously as she had appeared. It was only then, as I sat in my apartment that night, that I took the note out of my pocket again. I read it one last time, those 3 words now feeling strangely familiar, as if they were meant for me all along. Not today. Story 16. S16. For weeks, something had been bothering me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the unease settled in every time I was in my living room, particularly at night. It wasn't the usual kind of unsettling feeling that you might get when you're alone in the dark. It was different. It felt like the space itself was wrong. Every night, just as I was about to settle down for bed, my dog would start barking at the same empty corner of the living room. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Maybe he was hearing something outside or responding to some noise in the house. But as the days turned into weeks, his barking didn't stop. Every single night right before bed, he would stand in that corner, staring intently, growling, his hackles raised. His barking was louder than usual, more frantic, almost as if he was trying to warn me. It started to wear on me. I tried everything I could think of to calm him down, but nothing worked. I would call him over to me, but he would resist, pulling back toward that spot as if something was holding his attention. I thought he might just be acting out, maybe something had triggered him, and the barking was his way of coping. But as the barking persisted, so did the growing sense of dread in my chest. It wasn't just the barking itself, it was the way he acted, the way he stared at the corner with such intensity, as if there was something there that I couldn't see. One night, I decided to investigate. I didn't believe in supernatural things, but the consistent barking at an empty corner was starting to get to me. I walked over to the spot where my dog was staring, trying to figure out what was so interesting to him. There was nothing there, just a bare patch of wall with a few small pieces of furniture around it. I bent down, looked closely, and even touched the corner, hoping to find some kind of clue. But there was nothing. No loose wires, no strange markings, no reason for my dog to be acting the way he was. I stood there for a moment, shaking off the odd feeling in my stomach, and then turned to head back to the couch. But before I could move, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a low, quiet whisper. It was so faint that I almost thought I had imagined it. But as I stood there in the silence, trying to make sense of what I had just heard, I realized that it wasn't my imagination. The whisper came again, this time clearer, and I felt a chill run through me. It wasn't just the whisper that frightened me, it was the fact that it was coming from the exact spot where my dog was always staring. I froze, my mind racing. What could it be? A draft? A creak in the house? But no, it didn't feel like that. It felt too deliberate, too unsettling. I turned and looked at my dog, who was still barking, his ears perked, his eyes locked on the corner. He wasn't reacting to anything outside, nothing that I could hear, but something in that space was making him anxious. I tried calling him, but he didn't respond. It was as if he couldn't hear me, his focus entirely consumed by whatever was in that corner. I decided to try a different approach. If there was some logical explanation for this, I needed to find it. Maybe there was an animal hiding in the wall, some rodent or insect that my dog could hear but I couldn't. I grabbed a flashlight, determined to inspect the area more thoroughly. As I shone the light into the corner, I felt the air grow colder. It wasn't just the temperature change from turning the light on, it felt colder, like a presence had filled the room. The light from the flashlight illuminated the walls and the empty space around me, but as I swept it across the corner, I saw something strange, a shadow. It wasn't the shadow of a piece of furniture or anything that should have been there. It was darker, almost unnatural, like it didn't belong. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking I was just tired or imagining things. But when I looked again, the shadow was still there, lingering, as if it was waiting. My dog's barking grew more frantic, and for the first time I felt genuinely afraid. I turned to leave the room, but the feeling of being watched, of something lingering just out of sight, stayed with me. My heart pounded as I rushed to the door, calling my dog to follow me. He wouldn't budge. It was like he was rooted to the spot, still staring intently at the corner. I reached down to grab him, but he yanked his head away, growling low in his throat. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just the dog who was reacting to something. I was too. I could feel it, the tension in the air, the pressure in my chest. It wasn't right. Something about that corner of the room was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if the room had a presence, now an undeniable, heavy presence that I couldn't shake. I left the room feeling an overwhelming sense of urgency. I took my dog with me, but he resisted, pulling against my grip. Once I was safely out of the living room, I sat down, trying to calm myself. I had to get some rest, but sleep was nearly impossible. I kept hearing my dog's bark echoing in my head, over and over, along with that whispering sound. My mind kept racing, wondering what I had heard, what had been in that corner. The next few nights, things only escalated. The barking grew louder, more persistent. I couldn't escape it. I tried to get back to my normal routine, but the fear was always there, gnawing at me. I started questioning everything. What if there was something in the walls? What if there was a logical explanation I hadn't thought of? Or was it something else entirely, something I couldn't explain? One night, in a desperate attempt to figure things out, I decided to set up a camera in the living room. I figured if my dog was reacting to something, I could at least see it for myself. I positioned the camera to capture the corner where he usually stared, hoping to get some evidence. I left the room, keeping my dog with me in the bedroom, hoping that would give me some peace of mind. The next morning, I eagerly watched the footage. For hours, the room was still, except for my dog's movements. But when the clock struck midnight, something changed. My dog suddenly got up, his ears twitching as he turned his head toward the corner. And then, just as I had seen countless times before, he began barking. But this time, the camera caught something else. A shadow moved in the corner, not from the furniture or any object, but as if it was floating. A dark mass that shifted and seemed to follow my dog's movements. I froze, watching the footage, unable to tear my eyes away. This wasn't just my imagination. There was something there. The shadow seemed to grow, expanding, swirling in the corner of the room. The camera captured my dog's frantic barking and pacing, but the shadow didn't move. It just stood there, still and silent. I watched in horror as it slowly disappeared into the wall, vanishing without a trace. That was the moment I understood. Whatever had been in that corner, whatever had been causing my dog to react like that, wasn't gone. It was still there. The shadows, the whispers, they were a part of it. And as much as I wanted to deny it, I couldn't. The presence in that corner was real, and it was waiting. Story 17. I woke up late one morning, my head still foggy from lack of sleep and the lingering weight of stress from the past few days. I had set my alarm, but it failed to go off, so now I was scrambling to get ready for work. The house was unusually quiet, the only sound coming from the distant hum of the refrigerator. I grabbed my phone to check the time. 8:30 a.m. I was already behind. I rushed out of my room and into the bathroom, hoping to start my morning routine as quickly as possible. As soon as I opened the door, I froze. The sound of running water hit my ears, clear and unmistakable, as if someone was already in the shower. The bathroom should have been empty, there was no one else at home. I peered into the room, expecting to see the curtain drawn back with steam filling the space. But to my surprise, the bathroom was completely dry. The tiles were spotless, the floor was dry, and there were no traces of water anywhere. My heart skipped a beat as I stood there, frozen in place, listening to the sound of the water continuing to run in the background. Confused, I stepped further into the room, looking around. The shower head was not on, and the faucet wasn't running either. The room seemed ordinary in every way except for the noise. I stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of it. Was I imagining the sound? Was it possible I was hearing something else, maybe water running somewhere else in the house? I listened intently, but no other water sounds reached my ears. The sound of the shower running remained loud and clear, like it was right in front of me. I reached out and pulled back the shower curtain, expecting to find the usual dampness, but nothing had changed. The space behind the curtain was dry. No water, no steam. The shower, which I had clearly heard running just moments ago, was completely untouched. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe there was a leak somewhere, causing the pipes to make noise, but that seemed unlikely, especially since I didn't notice any signs of moisture anywhere. Still, the persistent sound filled the air, almost as if mocking my confusion. I turned off the light and left the bathroom, hoping the noise would stop once I was out of the room. But even as I left, the sound of the water continued, faint but undeniable, echoing through the walls of the house. I stood in the hallway, my mind spinning, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I hadn't been imagining the noise. It was real. And yet, it didn't make sense. How could the shower be running when the water wasn't on? I walked back to the kitchen to grab a quick breakfast, but the strange sensation of unease lingered, the sound of water running still in the back of my mind. I tried to push it out of my thoughts, focusing on the tasks ahead. I needed to get to work. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it was difficult. Something about the whole situation felt off, like I was missing something important. Later that day, I returned home after a long day of work, too tired to think about anything but sleep. As I walked through the front door, I immediately noticed the strange silence. The house was still, and everything seemed perfectly ordinary. But as I made my way down the hallway toward my bedroom, I stopped dead in my tracks. From the bathroom, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of water running. I had only been gone a few hours, and yet the sound was as clear as ever, like it was happening right at that moment. My heart started to race again. I hesitated, unsure if I should investigate or if I was just overthinking things. But I couldn't ignore it any longer. I slowly walked toward the bathroom, my pulse quickening with each step. I paused at the door, listening. The sound of water running was louder now, almost deafening in its intensity. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure: it was coming from the shower. I opened the door again, half expecting to see the same dry bathroom as before. But this time the scene before me was different. The shower curtain was drawn back, and to my shock, water was flowing from the shower head. The floor was wet, steam filled the air, and the sound of water rushing down filled the room. My breath caught in my throat as I stood there, unable to move. How could this be? I had checked earlier, and there was nothing at all. I quickly stepped back, my mind racing. I didn't understand what was happening. How could the shower have been dry when I checked earlier? How could the water have started running on its own? There was no one else in the house, and the water hadn't been on when I left. It didn't make sense. I turned off the shower and stepped out of the bathroom, still in shock. I felt dizzy, my head spinning as I tried to piece together what had just happened. Could there be an explanation I was missing? Maybe it was a malfunction with the plumbing, or perhaps I had missed something earlier when I checked. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the shower and the strange events that had occurred. Had I imagined the sound? Was it some sort of trick my mind was playing on me? Or was there something else at play? But as I lay in bed that night, trying to fall asleep, I couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The sound of running water seemed to linger in my mind, echoing in the silence of the house. It wasn't until I finally drifted off to sleep that the noise seemed to stop, leaving me in a deep, uneasy slumber. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of relief, hoping that the strange events had been nothing more than a bad dream. But when I entered the bathroom, I was confronted with the same unsettling sight. The shower was dry, the floor was clean, and everything appeared as it should. Except for one thing, the faint sound of water running in the background. Story 18. It was an ordinary afternoon when I decided to take a walk. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm glow on the pavement as I strolled down a quiet street. I wasn't in a hurry, just enjoying the calmness of the neighborhood when I noticed him. A man standing near the corner, his eyes fixed on me in a way that felt a little too intense. He didn't seem to belong, not in the way people normally do when they're just passing through. There was something unsettling about his presence, but I shrugged it off. It was probably just my imagination, I thought. As I walked closer, I heard him speak, his voice low but clear. "You're not supposed to be here." The words stopped me in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, unsure of how to respond. I looked around, trying to make sense of what he had said. The street was as empty as it had been when I started walking. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so why did this stranger's words feel so strange? I looked back at him, searching for any hint of a smile or indication that he was joking, but his face remained serious. There was no humor in his eyes, no warmth. It was as if he truly believed what he had said. I took a step back, unsure of how to react. Should I confront him? Ignore him and keep walking? But something about his tone made me hesitate. I felt an odd chill run down my spine, a sense of danger I couldn't explain. It was as though he knew something I didn't, something that made his words carry weight. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to ask, my voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I wondered if he was just a madman, but there was something in his eyes, something calculating, that made me second-guess that assumption. "Don't you see?" he said, his voice quieter now, as though he was sharing a secret. "This place is not where you're supposed to be. You need to leave." His words were like a puzzle piece falling into place, but the picture it created didn't make any sense. I couldn't understand what he meant by not where you're supposed to be. The street was just a street. The neighborhood was just a neighborhood. I had walked this route countless times before, and nothing had ever felt wrong about it. But there was something about the way he spoke, the urgency in his voice, that made me second-guess everything. I tried to ignore the unease creeping up inside me and took another step back, deciding it would be best to leave the situation behind. But as I turned to walk away, I heard him speak again, his voice suddenly louder. "You've already seen too much. They'll come for you." The words echoed in my mind as I quickened my pace, my feet moving faster as I tried to distance myself from him. I didn't know what he was talking about or who they were, but the fear that had started to build in my chest now took hold fully. Who was this man? What did he know about me? Why was he so certain I didn't belong here? I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting him to be following me, but when I looked, he was gone. The street was empty again, just like before. No sign of him, no trace of the strange encounter. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. I stopped for a moment, standing in the middle of the sidewalk, trying to process what had just happened. My mind raced, replaying his words over and over again. What did he mean by "you're not supposed to be here"? Why had he said that to me? I tried to push the thought from my mind and continued walking, but the words lingered, following me like a shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that somehow the world around me had shifted in ways I couldn't understand. I had always believed that life was simple, that the world was as it appeared. But now, after that brief encounter, I wasn't so sure anymore. What if there was something more to all of this? Something hidden just beneath the surface? The further I walked, the more unsettled I became. I couldn't help but wonder if the man had been right. Had I really walked into a place I wasn't supposed to be? It sounded crazy, I know, but the certainty in his voice had been undeniable. It was like he knew something about me, something that I wasn't aware of. A part of me wanted to dismiss it all as nonsense, just the ramblings of a stranger. But another part of me couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, the sense that I had stumbled onto something I wasn't meant to see. I turned a corner, trying to shake off the feeling, but the atmosphere around me had changed. The streets looked different somehow, less familiar, as if I had stepped into a place that wasn't quite the same as the one I knew. The buildings seemed to loom over me, casting long shadows that stretched further than they should have. It felt as though the world had subtly altered, and I had missed it. The more I walked, the more I felt like I was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I had no idea how to explain it, but the sense of disorientation only grew stronger. I checked the time on my phone, hoping to ground myself back in reality. But when I looked, the time was completely wrong. Hours had passed, yet it felt like only minutes had gone by. Panic began to rise in my chest as I looked around, trying to make sense of the situation. I felt like I was trapped in a place I didn't recognize, surrounded by a world that didn't quite make sense anymore. I finally decided to head home, hoping that getting back to my familiar surroundings would make everything feel normal again. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every step I took, I felt eyes on me, as though someone or something was following me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. But no matter how fast I walked, the sense of being pursued didn't go away. I looked over my shoulder every few steps, half expecting to see the man from earlier, but there was no one there. When I finally reached my door, I rushed inside and locked it behind me, my hands trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the unease remained. I didn't understand what had just happened. The stranger's words echoed in my mind, and I wondered if he had been warning me about something I hadn't yet realized. What did he mean by "they'll come for you"? Who were they, and why did he think I didn't belong here? As I sat down, trying to collect my thoughts, a message appeared on my phone. It was from an unknown number, with only a single line of text: "You're not supposed to be here." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the message for a long moment, my hands still trembling. It felt as though everything had just come full circle, like I was trapped in some kind of loop I couldn't escape. What did it all mean? Was I really in a place I wasn't supposed to be? And if so, how could I ever find my way out? Story 19. N. I had just finished a busy day at work, the usual routine that left me drained but satisfied. The clock on my phone read 7:45 p.m. as I flopped onto the couch, ready to relax for a few minutes before I had to get back to my tasks. I picked up my phone and unlocked it, planning to scroll through some emails or maybe catch up on a few messages. But as soon as I opened the screen, I froze. A missed call. From my own number. I blinked, unsure if I had seen it right. I was certain I hadn't called myself, and I certainly hadn't been expecting any calls at all. The thought of my phone ringing from my own number sent an unsettling chill down my spine. Maybe it was a glitch, I thought. Some kind of technical error. But the missed call was still there, right on the screen, as clear as day. I clicked on the notification, intending to listen to the voicemail or whatever had been left behind. There was nothing. The voicemail was empty. The silence on the other end felt like a void that pulled me in, making the situation even stranger. Who would call me from my own number, and why would they leave no message? I turned the phone in my hand, staring at it for a while. My mind raced with questions, but no answers came. The phone was functioning normally. Everything seemed fine, yet there was no explanation for what had just happened. I thought about calling my number back, but something stopped me. A nagging feeling in my gut told me that it wasn't a good idea. Instead, I did what anyone would do. I checked the recent calls list, hoping to find something, anything, that might explain it. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just a few calls from work and messages from friends. I scrolled down further, my eyes scanning the numbers. Then, my heart skipped a beat when I saw it again, a call from my own number, this time with the timestamp showing just a few minutes earlier. It wasn't just a missed call. It was a call that had come through while I was sitting on the couch, completely unaware of it. The thought was unsettling. How could my own number be calling me when I was holding my phone in my hands? My mind was racing, my heart beating faster now. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of strange loop, like the rules of reality had been bent just slightly. I checked my phone's call log again, scrolling carefully to make sure I hadn't missed anything. Still, no answers, just the call, sitting there like a message I couldn't decode. I glanced around the room, almost expecting someone to be standing there, watching me. There was no one. Just the quiet hum of the house, the usual peace that normally helped me unwind. But today it felt different. The air felt heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After a few minutes of deliberation, I put the phone down and tried to distract myself. I got up and started doing the dishes, trying to push the incident to the back of my mind. I told myself it was probably just a prank call, maybe someone using a spoofing service. But even as I rinsed the plates, the thought lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. It was one thing to receive an odd call, but from my own number. That was something I couldn't easily explain away. The night passed uneventfully, but the feeling stayed with me. I checked my phone again before bed, half expecting to find more missed calls or strange messages. There was nothing, but that didn't ease my mind. It only deepened the mystery. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. I didn't want to spend another day thinking about the strange call. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had breakfast and went about my routine, but the call from my own number kept creeping into my thoughts. I even checked my phone again, convinced I'd missed something, but there was still nothing. Later that afternoon, I went to run some errands. The day was normal, too normal. But as I was driving home, something caught my attention. My phone rang. I glanced down at the screen, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a call from my own number again. I immediately pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking as I answered the call. There was no voice on the other end, just a faint clicking sound, like someone was pressing buttons or moving around. The silence was oppressive, thick with something unspoken. I waited for a response, but none came. Just the same eerie clicking, followed by the call ending abruptly. I sat there for a moment, stunned. I had just experienced it again. A call from my own number. This time I wasn't imagining it. This was real. My mind was spinning, trying to understand what was happening. It was impossible to ignore the growing sense of dread building inside me. Something was wrong, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I didn't know what to do next. Calling the phone company felt pointless. They'd never be able to explain this. Calling a friend or family member wouldn't help either. Who would believe me? It felt like something I had to figure out on my own. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint sounds coming from the phone, like it was trying to tell me something. The clicks, the silence, the inexplicable calls. My mind was too active, too alert to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the missed call on the screen, flashing like a warning I couldn't interpret. Days passed, but the calls didn't stop. I tried to block my number, but that didn't work. I tried turning off my phone, but when I turned it back on, the missed calls were there. I even reset the phone, hoping to erase whatever was causing it, but nothing worked. The calls kept coming, always from my own number, always silent, always unnerving. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. How could this be happening? Why was this happening? I had no answers, just questions that led to more questions. And the worst part was that I was starting to wonder if I would ever get an answer. One night, as I sat in the dark, staring at the screen, waiting for the inevitable next call, I heard something. A faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the phone. I held it up to my ear, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper grew clearer, the words forming just enough for me to make them out. Help me. I felt the blood drain from my face as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. It was me. The voice on the other end. It was my voice. The words, the sound, everything clicked. The calls from my own number. The silence, the whisper. It had all been me. My past self reaching out in some strange, inexplicable way. But what did it mean? Why was I calling myself? What was trying to break through, and how could I stop it? For the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of calm. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. The calls had stopped. I had to find out what was really going on, but whatever it was, I would face it head on. I was done being afraid. Story 20. The day had been long, and I was eager to finally get home. As I walked up the steps to my front door, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The house was quiet, too quiet, as I entered through the door. I had the usual routine: take off my shoes, hang up my coat, and head straight to the kitchen to grab something to eat. But today, my eyes immediately shifted toward the hallway. There it was, the closet door slightly ajar, just enough to make me pause. I always made sure to leave it fully closed when I left the house. It wasn't a matter of habit, but a sense of order that kept me at ease. So seeing it open, even by just a crack, set off a strange sense of unease deep in my chest. It was such a small thing, but it felt wrong in a way that I couldn't explain. I stood frozen in place for a moment, my hand still on the door handle, unsure of whether I should approach it or ignore it. My thoughts immediately went to the logical explanations. Maybe I had left it open by accident. But no, that didn't feel right. I had a clear memory of closing it before leaving earlier that day. The door didn't have a tendency to shift or open on its own, so why was it open now? I cautiously stepped forward, my footsteps muffled on the soft carpet as I made my way toward the closet. The hallway lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I reached the door, and for a moment, I considered just leaving it alone. But the urge to know the truth won out, and I pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. At first glance, everything seemed normal. There was the usual jumble of jackets, shoes, and bags neatly arranged. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A faint smell lingered in the air, something odd and unfamiliar, like a mix of dust and something else. As I looked closer, my gaze fell on a small object that didn't belong. A photograph, crumpled and half hidden behind a pair of boots, caught my eye. I bent down to pick it up, my fingers trembling as I turned it over. It was an old picture, one I didn't recognize. A group of people stood in front of a house, smiling for the camera, but none of their faces were familiar. It was unsettling, to say the least. I quickly shoved the photo into my pocket, not sure what to make of it. Maybe it had somehow gotten mixed up with my things, but that didn't explain why it had ended up in the closet. The air felt heavier now, the silence in the house suffocating. I closed the closet door, almost a little too forcefully, and leaned against it for a moment to steady myself. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread that had settled in my chest. My mind raced as I considered all the possibilities, none of which made any sense. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had been in my house while I was gone, but that didn't explain the photograph. I went to check the rest of the house, moving through each room with an unsettling sense of paranoia. Everything seemed in place, just as I had left it. There were no signs of forced entry or disturbance. Yet the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something wasn't quite right, lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about that photo and how it had ended up in my closet. My stomach churned with unease as I scanned each room again, making sure nothing was out of place. I returned to the living room and sat down, my thoughts spinning. I was sure I was overthinking things. It was probably nothing, right? A stray photo or a small oversight. But there was a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that told me otherwise. I looked at my phone, trying to distract myself, but even then, my mind kept returning to the strange occurrence. I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been in my home, that something or someone was watching me. The hours dragged on, and the unease didn't dissipate. I couldn't ignore the feeling of being on edge, constantly glancing over my shoulder as if expecting someone to jump out at me. The house felt cold, unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I tried to shake off the paranoia, but every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside, made me jump. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph, and the faces of those strangers haunted my dreams. I couldn't understand why it felt so important, why it felt like a piece of something I was missing, but I couldn't shake the sense that I had crossed some invisible line, that by discovering that photo I had uncovered something I wasn't supposed to know. The next morning I decided to do something about it. I went back to the closet, My mind made up that I would find out what was going on. I needed answers. This time I took the photograph with me, carefully examining the faces once more. I couldn't tell if they were happy or if they were hiding something. I ran my finger over the edges of the image, hoping it would trigger some memory, some recognition. But there was nothing. I couldn't help myself. I decided to try something. I took the photo to a local photo lab, hoping they might be able to help me trace its origins. Maybe someone would recognize the people in the picture, and I could finally put this strange mystery to rest. The technician took the photo from me and assured me they'd look into it. I left the lab, still unsure if I was doing the right thing. That evening, I received a call from the lab. The technician's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. "We found something unusual," they said. "This photo, it's not from this time period. It's older than you think." My heart skipped a beat as they continued. "We've tracked it back to an old address, one that's no longer on any maps." I felt a cold chill run down my spine as the technician described the address, an old house in a neighborhood that had been torn down years ago. The name of the street, the landmarks, they all seemed so familiar, but I couldn't place why. The technician told me they'd send me more information soon, but as the conversation ended, I was left with a deep sense of dread. It didn't take long for the unease to turn into something more. A few days later, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. Inside was another photograph, exactly like the one I had found in my closet. Same people, same smiles. But this time there was something different. One of the faces was circled, and beneath it, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "You've seen them before." The world around me seemed to close in, and I knew that whatever was happening wasn't just a coincidence. I had no idea how I was connected to this mystery, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The closet door was closed again, but I knew it wouldn't be for long. Something was coming, and I had no choice but to find out what it was. Story 21. I had parked my car on the street as usual, not thinking anything unusual would happen. The evening was quiet, and the streets were relatively empty, with just a few cars scattered here and there. I had gone into the convenience store to pick up some snacks for the night, my mind preoccupied with the mundane thoughts of what I needed to get done. When I returned to my car, everything seemed normal. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting a yellowish hue over the rows of parked cars. It wasn't until I approached my car that I noticed something was different. There was a small piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. At first, I thought it might have been an advertisement or some kind of flyer that people often leave on cars in the neighborhood. But as I got closer and saw the writing, my heart skipped a beat. It was handwritten, neat and precise, the kind of handwriting that looked almost too perfect, too deliberate. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to even touch the note. But curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled it out from under the wiper. The words were simple, yet they sent an icy chill down my spine. "You were here first." That was all it said. I stood there, staring at the note for several long seconds, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that it might have been some kind of prank, maybe from a friend who thought it would be funny to leave an odd message. But there was something about the note that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the message itself, it was the way it was left. I hadn't seen anyone approach my car while I was inside the store. No one had walked past it. And yet, the note was under my wiper, as if someone had been waiting for me to leave so they could place it there. I looked around, trying to spot anyone nearby, but the street was still and quiet. No one was in sight. I quickly scanned the area, feeling a sense of unease creeping up my spine. There was nothing about the note that made sense. It wasn't a message I could easily explain away. It wasn't a simple misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity, or anything I could rationalize. The words lingered in my mind, repeating over and over as if they were meant to mean something more. I tried to dismiss the feeling that something was off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. The note felt personal in a way I couldn't quite explain. You were here first. It was almost like the person who had written it knew something about me. Had I been parked here before in some other context? Had I unknowingly crossed someone's path? I tried to remember if I had seen anyone lurking around my car, or anyone who might have a reason to leave such an ominous message, but nothing came to mind. The strange thing was, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. I hadn't received any notes like this before, but I had a nagging sense of déjà vu, as if I had experienced this exact situation in some form. I pushed the thought out of my mind, trying to focus on the present. I crumpled up the note and tossed it into my car, deciding it wasn't worth dwelling on. But as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The words echoed in my mind, their meaning slipping just out of my grasp. What did they mean? Who had left the note, and why? I couldn't make sense of it, but something about the entire situation felt off, like I was missing a piece of the puzzle. The more I thought about it, the more I began to feel like I wasn't alone in all of this, as if someone or something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to make their presence known. When I got home, I parked my car in the driveway and quickly went inside. I tried to focus on my evening routine, telling myself it was just a harmless prank, but the unease still clung to me. I tried to distract myself with television, reading, and the usual activities I did to wind down, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I couldn't help but wonder if there was someone out there, someone who knew more about me than I was comfortable with. Maybe it was just my overactive imagination, but it felt like I was being followed, like someone had been watching me for longer than I realized. The following morning, I woke up with a lingering sense of dread. It was hard to shake the feeling that something was going to happen. I went about my day, but every time I stepped outside or drove anywhere, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. I checked my car before leaving for work, but there was no sign of anything unusual. No more notes, no more signs of anyone who had been watching me. It almost seemed like nothing had happened at all, like it was all in my head. But later that afternoon, as I returned to my car after a meeting, I noticed something again. It was subtle at first, just a small detail that caught my eye. The seatbelt was pulled out, as if someone had been in the car and had used it. I hadn't left it like that. I tried to think back to the last time I had driven the car, but I couldn't recall ever leaving the seatbelt in such a position. It wasn't enough to confirm that someone had been in the car, but it was unsettling nonetheless. I decided to go to the police, just to be safe. When I told the officer about the note, he gave me a sympathetic smile, but I could tell he didn't take me seriously. He told me it was probably just a prank, that I shouldn't worry about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. The officer took my statement and said they would keep an eye on things, but deep down, I knew that the sense of unease wasn't going to go away so easily. The next few days were filled with more strange occurrences. The seatbelt was out of place again, the note on my windshield wiper was missing, but the feeling of being watched was more intense than ever. I couldn't escape it. I started to check my car every time I parked, every time I left and came back. But there was no more physical evidence. No more notes, no more signs of tampering, yet the feeling remained. One night, after a particularly long day, I came home and parked my car in the driveway. When I got out and walked toward the front door, I turned around for a brief moment, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. And just as I did, I caught sight of something in my rearview mirror. The faintest silhouette of a person standing at the edge of the driveway, just barely visible in the shadows. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around, but there was no one there. The street was quiet, empty, just like it had been for days. That's when I realized it wasn't just the note that had been meant for me. It was the beginning of something much more unsettling. Something was out there, and they were waiting. Story 22. I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when the ringtone suddenly blared through the silence. I froze, heart pounding, as I stared at the screen. It was a call from an unknown number. I had been getting a lot of those lately, but this time something felt different. Maybe it was just my imagination, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I let it ring for a moment, unsure if I wanted to answer. The sound seemed louder than usual, almost as if the phone was vibrating through my bones. I picked it up with a shaky hand, the screen still showing the strange, unknown number. As soon as I answered, the first thing I heard was my own voice, clearly coming through the speaker. "Hello?" I heard myself say, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't just the words that made my stomach drop, it was the tone, the way it sounded like me, but not me at all. It was the exact same tone I use when I pick up the phone, but somehow there was something unsettling about it. Something wrong. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, trying to make sense of it. The voice on the other end continued, "I'll be there soon. But don't worry." I didn't understand. It was as if I were speaking to myself, but at the same time I wasn't. My mind raced with questions. How was this possible? Who was on the other end of the line mimicking my voice so perfectly? I didn't know what to do. My hands felt clammy as I tried to gather my thoughts, but it felt as though my brain wasn't working properly. The voice kept repeating those same words, "Don't worry. I'll be there soon." But I hadn't said anything to anyone recently about expecting a visit. My chest tightened, and I felt a cold sweat forming on my skin. Something was wrong. I wanted to hang up, but it felt as though I was paralyzed, unable to move. The words my voice spoke on the other end of the line were eerily calm, almost soothing, like they were trying to convince me that everything was fine. But everything in me screamed that it wasn't. Something about it was far from fine. I felt an overwhelming sense of unease, but I couldn't break free from the call. After a long moment, the voice spoke again. "It's okay. I'm almost there." I snapped out of my trance and quickly hung up the phone. My hands were shaking as I placed the device back on the table. I stared at it for a long time, unsure of what to do next. What had just happened? The voice was so familiar, and yet I knew it wasn't me. My pulse was still racing, and I couldn't seem to catch my breath. My mind was spinning with possibilities, none of them making sense. I tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail, no rings at all. I left a message, but no response came. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about the call. The words that had been spoken so calmly, the way they had felt like they came from a version of me I didn't recognize. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was messing with my mind. It was as though I had slipped into some alternate reality where the lines between me and something else had blurred. That night, as I lay in bed, trying to quiet my mind, the thought of the call kept creeping back into my thoughts. I had told myself that I'd imagined it, that it was just some strange glitch in the phone system. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a glitch. It was something more, It was like hearing my own voice, but from someone else's mouth, and I couldn't explain it. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone ringing again. I nearly jumped out of my skin, heart racing as I grabbed it from the bedside table. My hand was clammy as I answered it, but when I heard the voice on the other end, my blood ran cold. It was the same voice as before. "I told you I'd be there soon," it said, in the same calm tone, but now there was something different about it. It was almost mocking, as if it knew I was scared, as if it had been waiting for me to hear those words. "You didn't think I was serious." The voice chuckled softly, a sound that chilled me to the bone. I slammed the phone down onto the table, shaking uncontrollably. What was happening? How was this possible? There was no way anyone could replicate my voice like that. It wasn't even the words that were so terrifying. It was the fact that it was coming from my own mouth. Only it wasn't me. For the next few days, I kept my phone on silent, afraid to hear that voice again. But the silence only made the fear grow. It was as though the voice was waiting for me to answer, to listen, to acknowledge it. And I was terrified of what might happen if I did. I stopped answering calls altogether, even from friends and family. The thought that someone or something could be using my own voice against me filled me with dread. Then one evening the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sudden sound made my heart race. I stood still for a moment, staring at the door. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something told me I needed to check. I cautiously approached the door, my nerves on edge. When I opened it, I was greeted by the sight of a woman standing on the porch. She was smiling, but her expression was strange, almost too wide. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked. The words sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't help but step back, my hand gripping the doorframe tightly. Her smile didn't seem right, like it was pasted on unnaturally. She didn't seem like anyone I knew, but something about her presence felt oddly familiar. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I wasn't expecting anyone." She tilted her head, still smiling, and then, in a voice that sounded eerily like my own, she said, "I told you I'd be here soon." I slammed the door shut and locked it, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. I stumbled backward, falling onto the floor as panic set in. The voice, the one I had heard on the phone, had just spoken through her. She had said the exact same words. I wasn't sure how or why, but I knew that whatever was happening was beyond my control. That night I sat in the dark, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the house was silent. I didn't hear my phone ring again, and I didn't hear that voice. The quiet was almost more unsettling than the sound of the voice had been. But as I sat there, trying to process everything, I finally realized one thing. I hadn't been alone this whole time. That voice, it had never been mine. Story 23. I walked into the store, not really having any specific plans in mind. The store was quiet, with just a few people browsing, the usual hum of fluorescent lights overhead. As I moved through the aisles, I casually glanced at the displays, my mind wandering. But something caught my eye near the back of the store. A mannequin standing perfectly still, wearing an outfit that made my heart race. It was my exact outfit from yesterday, the same jacket, the same jeans, the same boots I had worn just the day before. It was impossible. How could it be? I hadn't seen this mannequin before, and I was certain the store hadn't had these clothes out for sale. The mannequin didn't look like it was wearing a version of the outfit. It looked like it had just been taken straight off me. I felt an eerie chill run down my spine as I moved closer. The mannequin was positioned so perfectly, so unnaturally, like it was waiting for me. I couldn't help but stare at it, almost as if my eyes were glued to the scene. The colors of the fabric, the way it draped around the mannequin's body, were too familiar to ignore. The stitching was identical to mine, even down to the slight fraying at the cuff of the jacket. I tried to shake off the unease, but my heart was racing, and a deep sense of confusion was bubbling up inside me. Had I somehow purchased the outfit from here yesterday and forgotten? Was this some kind of bizarre coincidence? I turned around, looking for an employee, someone to explain this odd sight. There was no one in the immediate vicinity. The aisles were empty. The store felt oddly deserted for a moment. I started to feel like I was the only one there, and the atmosphere was growing more uncomfortable with every passing second. I looked back at the mannequin once again, trying to convince myself that I was just overthinking things. But there was something about the mannequin's pose, its lifeless eyes staring ahead, that made me feel like it wasn't just a display anymore. The thought crossed my mind that maybe someone had been watching me, that maybe they were trying to send me a message. But who would do something so strange? As I stood there, my mind racing, I started to feel like I was being watched. It was as if every part of the store was closing in on me, the walls feeling too tight. The mannequin's gaze seemed to follow me as I moved. I couldn't be sure if it was just my imagination or if it was really happening. But the longer I stared at it, the more it felt like the mannequin was a reflection of me, something that belonged to my own world but was eerily out of place in the store. I had to get away from it, but my legs felt heavy, as though I was moving through thick mud. I turned to leave, but the store seemed so different now. The aisles that had once felt so familiar now seemed distant, as if they were stretching out further than they should. I left the store as quickly as I could, the doors almost closing too soon behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short bursts. Once outside, I took a moment to breathe, trying to ground myself back in reality. What had just happened? I couldn't explain it. There was no logical explanation for what I had seen. It was just an outfit, and yet it felt like something much bigger. I glanced at my reflection in a nearby window, noticing the same jacket and boots I had worn yesterday. Everything seemed normal now, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Could it be possible that someone had gone out of their way to dress a mannequin in my exact clothes? Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe not, but the unease I felt would not go away. I walked away from the store, hoping that the feeling would eventually fade, but it stayed with me. It followed me home, a quiet presence in the back of my mind. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the mannequin standing there, waiting for me to pass by. But it wasn't there. The store had vanished from my thoughts for a few moments, only to return once I was safely back inside my apartment. I sat down on the couch, trying to make sense of what had happened, but the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. There were too many strange details: the timing, the exactness of the outfit, the stillness of the mannequin. It was all too perfect, too calculated. The next morning, I woke up and checked my closet. I needed to make sure that the outfit was still there, that I hadn't imagined it. My clothes were exactly where I had left them the night before, nothing out of place. But even as I reached for the jacket, I hesitated. I couldn't shake the image of the mannequin, the lifeless gaze that had unnerved me so deeply. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that it was just a strange coincidence. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't dismiss the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to go about my day normally, but the image of that mannequin kept creeping into my thoughts. I couldn't focus, couldn't shake the sense of being followed, of being watched. Every reflection I passed, every glance at my clothes, made my stomach twist with unease. I began to wonder if I was being paranoid, if this whole thing was just a figment of my imagination. But the more I thought about it, the less I could convince myself that it was just a strange coincidence. Later that evening, I decided to go back to the store. Maybe I could find some answers, see if the mannequin was still there. I needed to know if it was something I had imagined or if it was something more. As I approached the store, I felt the weight of the air pressing down on me, a tension I couldn't explain. When I entered, I immediately went to the same section where I had seen the mannequin the day before. There, standing exactly where I had left it, was the same mannequin wearing the same outfit I had worn just yesterday. I felt my pulse quicken and I stepped closer, studying it with disbelief. There was no mistake. It was my outfit, identical down to the smallest detail. But this time, something was different. There was a note tucked into the mannequin's pocket. I reached out cautiously, my hands trembling as I pulled it out. The note was simple, handwritten, and it read, "I'm waiting for you to understand." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I read the words. What did it mean? Was this some kind of sick joke, or was there something deeper happening? I couldn't process it, and for the first time I wondered if I was losing my grip on reality. I took one last look at the mannequin and quickly turned to leave, the note still clutched in my hand. I knew that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Something strange was happening, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I didn't have the answers, but I was certain of one thing: this wasn't just a coincidence. Story 24. I had just finished a long day at work, the kind where you feel mentally drained but physically restless. I had been working non-stop, balancing calls, emails, and various projects that seemed to pile up faster than I could tackle them. By the time I wrapped up, I was hungry but too tired to cook, so I decided to treat myself. I opened my favorite food delivery app and ordered a simple meal, something familiar, comforting, and quick. It took longer than usual for the delivery to arrive, but after about 40 minutes, the doorbell rang. I shuffled to the door, still in my work clothes, hair slightly messy from running my hands through it in frustration. When I opened the door, I was greeted by the familiar sight of a delivery driver holding a bag with my order. I smiled, thanked him, and took the food inside. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for a faint feeling that something was slightly off, though I couldn't put my finger on it. I set the bag down on the counter and began pulling out the containers, eagerly anticipating my meal. The scent of warm food filled the kitchen, and I couldn't wait to dig in. As I opened the box with my sandwich, I noticed something strange. Tucked underneath the food was the receipt, one I had seen many times before when ordering food. But this time, something was different. The usual printed details were there: the price, the items, the delivery address. But there, scrawled on the bottom of the receipt in messy handwriting, was a note that read, "Enjoy, stranger." My hand froze as I read the words. My mind raced. Stranger. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I was sure the person who packed my order didn't look unfamiliar. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was some kind of weird joke or a mistake, but the unease settled in. Who would leave such a cryptic note on a receipt for a delivery I'd placed through a normal service? I thought it was probably some prank or an accidental mix-up, but why would it have been included with my order? Why was the word stranger written in such an odd way? I sat down at the kitchen table with my food, the receipt still in front of me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was this some kind of attempt at humor? A way to make the delivery feel more personal? The phrase "enjoy, stranger" echoed in my head, unsettling me. Who was this person who had left the note? Was this a one-off or something that had happened before to other customers? The more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. I had ordered food from this place before, and the service was always standard. After a few minutes, I decided to push it aside. I had a meal to eat, after all, and I wasn't going to let some strange note ruin my evening. I took a bite of my sandwich and tried to enjoy the food, but the words on the receipt lingered in my mind. I kept glancing over at it, the handwritten note almost daring me to give it more attention. Just as I was about to finish the last bite, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, distracted by the ping of a notification. It was from a group chat with a few of my friends. One of them had sent a message with a laughing emoji and a photo it attached. I opened it, expecting something funny. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. It was a picture of the exact receipt I had just received. But this one had been taken by someone else, someone who had clearly ordered from the same restaurant. The note was the same, "Enjoy, stranger." I stared at the image, my heart pounding. I quickly typed out a message in the group chat, "Where did you get this?" But before I could hit send, another message popped up. "I got it with my order tonight. Same note, same handwriting. Weird, right?" I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My mind was racing now, trying to figure out how this could be happening. How could someone have left the same exact note in my order and someone else's? Could this be some kind of coordinated prank? Or was it something else entirely? I felt a cold sweat on my forehead as I typed, "What restaurant did you order from?" They replied almost immediately. "The same place you ordered from, the deli on Maple Street." I sat back in my chair, completely stunned. I had ordered from that deli a handful of times, but I didn't recognize anyone working there. I didn't even think to look for anything unusual. My phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was another message in the group chat. I just got a weird call after eating. The voice said, "Don't trust the food." My stomach dropped. This was getting too strange. What was going on? I checked the clock on my phone, almost 9 p.m. I needed to sleep, but the unease was building with each passing minute. Was I being watched? Was someone playing some sick game with me? After a few minutes of contemplation, I decided to head to the restaurant. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but I had to know if there was any connection to this note and the others who had received it. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my jacket, and left the house, my footsteps echoing in the quiet night air. The street was empty, and the closer I got to the deli, the more anxious I became. The thought of confronting someone there made me nervous, but I couldn't let it go. When I arrived, the restaurant looked the same as always. No lights flickering, no strange sounds. It was calm, almost too calm for the unsettling feeling I had. I walked up to the door and tried the handle. It was locked. But before I could turn to leave, the door creaked open, revealing a man behind the counter. His eyes widened as he saw me, and I could tell that he was startled by my unexpected appearance. "Hey, can I help you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I ordered food here tonight," I said, trying to sound calm despite the panic building inside me. "Did anyone leave a note with my food?" The man's expression faltered for a moment, and he looked at the floor. I could tell he wasn't being entirely honest with me. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," he replied, his voice tense. I pulled out the receipt from my pocket and handed it to him. He looked at it and then back at me, his face now pale. "I don't know what this is," he muttered, almost to himself. "But there's something you need to know." Suddenly the door slammed shut behind me, and I heard a clicking sound, like a lock being turned. The man backed away slowly, his eyes wide with fear. "Leave now," he whispered urgently, "before it's too late." Confused and scared, I stumbled backward. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Enjoy, stranger," he said with a cold smile. "You'll understand soon enough." I turned and ran out of the restaurant, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what he meant, but something told me that I had just uncovered a much darker secret than I could have ever imagined. Something told me that the note, the calls, and the strange coincidence were all part of something bigger than I was ready to face. And I wasn't sure I would ever be able to look at food delivery the same way again. Story 25. I woke up to another ordinary day, or at least I thought it would be. The sun was barely rising, and I was already feeling the usual exhaustion that came with my busy work life. I stumbled out of bed and went through the motions, brushing my teeth, grabbing a quick breakfast, and packing my bag for the day. It wasn't until I was at the door, about to leave, that I noticed something odd in my wallet. A small slip of paper, a receipt, sticking out from between the folds of the cash. I pulled it out, expecting it to be a receipt from one of my usual purchases. But as I looked at it, I froze. The receipt was from a restaurant I didn't recognize. The name, printed in bold letters, meant nothing to me. The date on it read yesterday, but I had no memory of being there. My mind raced. And could I have gone there without thinking? Maybe I was too tired to remember. But no, I was sure I hadn't visited any new restaurants recently. The receipt was for a meal, a dinner complete with drinks and an appetizer. I studied it for a moment longer, trying to recall any faint memory of being in such a place. Nothing. I wasn't someone who went out to eat often, especially not without telling anyone. I always made sure to keep track of where I went, but this receipt felt like it was from a parallel universe, one where I had a night out I didn't know about. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was a mix-up, but the more I stared at the receipt, the stranger it seemed. The details on it weren't matching up with anything I could recall. The time of the transaction was listed as 7:45 p.m., but I had been home by that time. I would have remembered if I had gone out to eat, especially somewhere new. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There had to be a mistake, but I didn't know what that mistake was. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I decided to investigate. I searched the restaurant's name online, hoping to find some explanation, but the results were confusing. The place had decent reviews, but nothing about it felt familiar. No memories stirred when I read through the website or scrolled through the pictures. I stared at the screen for a while, trying to see if anything clicked, but nothing did. It was as if this restaurant didn't belong to my life. Yet somehow, the receipt in my wallet proved otherwise. I called my best friend later in the day, hoping they might know something. "Hey, have you ever heard of this place?" I asked, sending them a photo of the receipt. They paused for a moment before replying. "I don't think I've heard of it, but you sure it's not a new place? Maybe you went there and forgot about it." Their response was logical, but it didn't make sense. I would have remembered, right? It wasn't like me to forget an evening out. We both agreed I needed to stop overthinking it. But the more I tried to move on, the more the receipt haunted me. I went about my day, trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to that damn slip of paper in my wallet. It seemed so real, so concrete, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. I couldn't explain it. I found myself reaching into my wallet again, just to confirm that it hadn't disappeared. Sure enough, there it was, tucked neatly between my credit cards as if it belonged. My fingers brushed over the date once more yesterday, and my heart skipped a beat. I didn't remember a single thing about it. That evening, I decided I had to find out more. I couldn't let it go. I had to know how this receipt ended up in my wallet. I drove to the restaurant. It wasn't far, only about a 10-minute drive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I didn't understand. The restaurant was small, tucked between a few larger buildings in an area I rarely visited. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and the dim lights inside gave it a cozy, almost secretive atmosphere. I walked inside, the bell above the door ringing softly as I entered. The place was nearly empty, save for a few patrons scattered at tables in the corners. The hostess smiled at me as I approached. "Hi, how can I help you?" she asked, her tone friendly, but there was something in her eyes that made me hesitate. "I think I may have eaten here yesterday," I said, trying to sound casual. "I found a receipt in my wallet from this place, but I don't remember being here." Her smile faltered just slightly, and I saw her eyes narrow ever so slightly, as if she was trying to place me. "We don't often get repeat customers, so I would remember," she said, her voice taking on a slightly cautious edge. I could tell she was trying to hide some level of discomfort, but it was too subtle for me to ignore. "Can you check your records?" I asked, still unsure of what was happening. She nodded slowly and led me to the front desk, where she pulled up a computer. As she clicked through a few screens, I stood there, barely able to breathe, wondering what she was going to say. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up from the screen, her face blank. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice colder now. "There's no record of a transaction from yesterday with your name. It must have been a mistake." I blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I have the receipt right here." I held it up, showing her the crumpled paper with the time, the date, and the items I supposedly ordered. She glanced at it, her eyes scanning it quickly before she looked back at me. "I don't know what to tell you," she said, her voice a little more dismissive now. "Perhaps you got it mixed up with somewhere else. We don't have any record of you being here." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at her, unsure of what to say. Something about her tone felt off, like she was hiding something. I left the restaurant feeling more confused and unsettled than ever. What was going on? How had I gotten that receipt? I drove home in a daze, trying to piece together any shred of memory, but there was nothing. The more I thought about it, the more my mind seemed to blank. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. The feeling of being trapped in some strange puzzle was suffocating. I hadn't eaten at the restaurant. I hadn't even been in that part of town. But somehow that receipt had ended up in my wallet. I had to let go of it. I knew that. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was missing something important. Something that would explain everything. As I opened my front door, I noticed something strange. A small package was sitting on the welcome mat, wrapped in plain brown paper. I hadn't ordered anything. Hesitantly, I bent down and picked it up. The handwriting on the label was familiar, but I couldn't place it. As I opened it, my heart sank. Inside was another receipt from the same restaurant, but this time it was for a completely different date, and it was addressed to me. The date? Yesterday. The restaurant? The same one. My stomach churned. There was no denying it now, this was no coincidence. Something was happening, and I was trapped in the middle of it, with no answers. Story 26. I had just finished a long day at work and was heading home, looking forward to a quiet evening. As I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, something caught my eye. There, across from where I normally parked, was a car that looked almost identical to mine. The model, the color, the way it was parked, all of it was so eerily similar to my own vehicle. But as I got closer, I noticed one small detail that set it apart. The license plate was different. Not by much, but enough to make me stop in my tracks. I had parked my car in the same spot every day for months, and I knew that I was the only one who had that particular vehicle in this lot. At first, I thought I must be mistaken. Maybe it was another car from the same make and model, just a coincidence. But the more I stared at it, the more it felt wrong. Something about the car seemed too familiar, almost as if it were my car, but somehow off in a way I couldn't quite put into words. I stood there for a few moments, trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things, but the nagging feeling didn't go away. I took a few steps closer, my eyes glued to the license plate. It was a minor difference, just a single letter, but it stood out to me in that moment. The combination of letters and numbers looked almost identical to mine, but there was a slight variation I couldn't shake. I glanced back and forth between my car and the one across from me, comparing the two, but everything else about them seemed the same. It felt like I was seeing double, like reality itself had shifted in some strange way. I could almost hear my heart beat in my ears as the weight of the situation sank in. I decided to take a closer look. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what was happening. Perhaps it was a simple mistake someone who had a similar